Bolinda Audio presents this unabridged recording of The Visitor, written by Jane R. Goodall and read by Nikki Paul. For Paul. Prelude. White Horse Hill, Uffington, Oxfordshire, 1st May 1974. And when they were up, they were up, and when they were down, they were down. When they were only halfway down the ancient hillside, the boys decided to reverse direction and go back to the top, chanting the rhyme in response to the shouts of protest from their minder, a teenage girl who was no match for 8-year-old twins.
"If she follows us," said Miles, "we can lie in the ditch under the ramparts, and she won't see us. Do you think she's coming?" "Course not, she can't even run."
Daniel strutted along the crest of the slope, calling out in a high voice with a mock French accent.
Oh, my jeans are too tight."
The dog cantered beside him, answering with short, sharp barks. Behind them, the prehistoric figure of the white horse stretched out, etched into the grass, glowing whiter than ever in the low-angled rays of light. Miles shuffled towards the edge of the chalk marking. His shoelaces had come undone on the climb, and his socks had been sucked deep under his heels.
"Why do we have to have an au pair, girl? They're so wet. Alexander says his au pair's even wetter than Sylvie. She spends all day putting on pink nail polish. Then she cries when she has to do the washing up."
"Well, anyway," said Daniel, sprinting across the grass to join him, "she can't make us go back if we want to play on the horse. It doesn't look like a horse, does it? Is that its tail?"
"No, that's its dick."
"It hasn't got a dick. There's none on the picture there." The two boys were staring at a brass plaque on which an image of the white horse had been engraved. It looked more like a goat or a dog when you saw it like that. But on the ground you couldn't really see its shape at all, because the curved white lines stretched right off into the distance. Some writing on the plaque said it was 3,000 years old. There was also a plain black and white sign telling you not to walk on the horse. Dragging his shoes, Miles stomped across to the middle of a wide patch of chalk and picked up a loose piece.
"It's hard," he said. "I bet you couldn't even draw with it."
He pitched it at his brother, then giggled and ducked as a bigger piece was shot back. The dogs sniffed at the ground while they collected loose pieces of chalk to put in their pockets. Daniel let out a yelp of laughter.
"Toffee just pissed on the horse's head. She pissed in its eye."
He ran, inciting the dog to race him across the open ground to the hill fort. Miles followed at a walking pace, pulling up the hood of his parka as a defence against the buffeting wind. He was frowning as he clambered up to join Daniel on the ramparts.
"Do you think Dad'll go off at us?" "Why? He brought us here to see the white horse. It's her fault if she doesn't want to come back up anyway."
Daniel stubbed at the ground with his toe.
"Dad ought to come with us himself, like other people's dads." "He's working."
Miles dragged the word out, distorting its syllables.
"That's what he says. He just likes to sit in the pub with his books for hours. He wouldn't care if we didn't come back till supper time. We'd miss Doctor Who." "You could land the TARDIS up here, or even a spaceship. What do you think it was like in the olden days?"
Daniel put his hands on his hips and surveyed the scene.
"If the enemy was coming, you could see them from right over the other side of the valley." "What good would that be? There might be 100 enemies galloping on horseback, and they'd jump over the ditch like that, and then they'd just—"
Miles wheeled around, gurgling.
"They'd cut everyone's throats." "They didn't cut people's throats. They axed them. They could split your skull in half with an axe."
The boys continued their tour, jumping about in the face of the wind. Then Miles pointed to some humped grey shapes in the field below.
"I know what those are." "So what?" "You think they're sheep, don't you?" They're sarsen stones. That's what you build stone circles out of. Big, gigantic ones that you have to drag with ropes. No, that's what they did at Stonehenge. The sarsen stones grow out of the ground. No, they don't. Daniel matched his brother's scornful tone. The ground wears away in the wind and the rain, and then the stones come out, and they stand up all by themselves. Some people think they're the devil's stones, and they smash them up. Miles made a low hooting noise through his cupped hands. If you did that, the devil would come after you. Do you think he comes after you for stealing chalk off his horse? Look! Daniel's voice dropped as he pointed. A slim, long-haired girl was toiling up the road that snaked around the hill. Keeping his eyes on the approaching figure, Miles tugged at his socks and made a crude knot in one of his shoelaces. Come on, we can go down the back, along the ridgeway. They careered down the track at full pelt until they ran out of breath, then continued in a meandering zigzag, swiping at the hedgerows on either side of them with sticks they'd found. The dog barked as some nesting birds took flight. What would happen if we didn't come back? Said Daniel. Mum would cry. No, she wouldn't. She'd call the police. What if we went into a time warp? Then the police wouldn't be able to find us. We could be Romans. Then we could set fire to all the barbarian villages. Then we could build a road all the way up through England to Scotland, completely straight. Miles coughed intermittently as he put this speech together. You've got asthma, said Daniel. No, I haven't. That means we'll have to go home. I've got my puffer. They had reached a crossroads with a right turn leading back to the main road, but Toffee was making her way towards some woods further along the ridgeway. Daniel ran after her and grabbed her collar as she veered off the main track and onto a path between the trees. There was someone in there, a man, chopping wood. Daniel could see his arm going up in a rhythmic swing and could hear the thump as it went down. He crouched behind a tree trunk, fascinated. Miles came up and stood next to him, frowning and wheezing. "What's he chopping with?" whispered Daniel. The man had something large and round in his hand, not an axe, and the noise was a blunt, bashing sound, not a sharp chop. For a second it seemed that the thing he was hitting made a movement. Then suddenly Toffee barked, and the man turned towards them, and they ran like mad, turning at the crossroads and pelting down the hill to the main road. Sylvie had called until her throat hurt, but there was no point. The boys went on running up the hill with their dog, in plain view, ignoring her. She would have to follow them, because if they got up to mischief again or got lost, she would be blamed. She decided to go up by the road. It was a longer way round, but from halfway the hill was so steep that going straight up the side meant more of a clamber than a walk, and her new jeans were too tight for that. Even looking out from the level roadway almost gave her vertigo. You could see for miles across the landscape, and the great expanse of sky showed several different kinds of weather. She was walking in direct sunlight, but off to the left was a mass of dark purple cloud, and the land there was in deep shadow. It was strange that what you could not see at all from here was the giant figure of the white horse. It had to be directly above her, its hooves dancing over her head. Earlier on she'd been trying to restrain the twins from standing on it, which you were not supposed to do. They were racing back there now, probably to run all over it. Her brother, who was the same age as them, never behaved like this. French children were better disciplined. And it was horrible being an au pair, because really you were just a cheap kind of servant for lazy parents, who often behaved like children themselves. What if she went back to the pub, found Dr. Gleason, and just told him the boys had run away? He would never think it was his responsibility. He would look at her blankly and say, "Well, hadn't you better go and find them?" At the top of the hill, the giant chalk image came back into view, looking almost luminous despite the greying sky. There was no sign of the boys. She crossed to see over the valley on the other side, and then did a tour all round, stopping every few yards, with the wind tugging at her hair and her thin jacket.
The ridgeway ran across the back of the hill fort. If they'd gone along there, they'd be hidden from view by the hedgerows. She heard a dog barking somewhere. With the wind whistling around her, it was hard to tell from which direction, so she made a guess. From up here, the track seemed to run fairly straight, but once you were on it, it snaked into dips and bends so you couldn't see far ahead. Sylvie was upset. The boys should be punished. If they were hers, she would send them to their room without any supper and take away their pocket money for 2 weeks at least. She didn't know whether she should go further along the ridgeway until she came out at a road that went to the village, or whether she should go back the way she came to avoid getting herself lost. Just as she was starting to think that this would be best, the track straightened out in front of her and sloped downhill, so she could see a good distance. There were the boys, about 30 yards away, darting between the hedgerows with Toffee dancing crazily around them. Sylvie broke into a run, but they disappeared from view again before she could catch up. The wooded area extended on both sides of the track, and a narrow pathway turned off to the right, between the trees. The boys had probably gone this way. She followed the path, but it gradually disappeared into the undergrowth as the wood closed in around her. At first the place seemed gloomy, but a few rays of sunlight broke through the clouds and turned the trees to a brilliant, glowing green. Everything was moving in the wind. The branches and leaves swayed chaotically, and the light rippled across them and played tricks on her eyes, making her think she had seen someone walking between the trees, first in one direction, then in another. Now she was really fed up with the chase, so she stopped and bent over with her hands on her knees to get her breath back. A new shaft of light struck through the branches onto the ground in front of her and spread over a large stone nearby, so that it cast off a deep gold glow. The stone made a good seat. She perched on it for a few minutes, listening to the sound of the wind, a strange sort of whistle that rose above the rustling of the leaves. At one point she thought she heard more barking in the distance, but she couldn't be sure. Anyway, she had made up her mind now. She was going to find her own way back to the village at her own pace. If the boys had not returned ahead of her, she was simply going to tell Dr. Gleason that they would have to call the police. Jumping to her feet again, she noticed there were lots of smaller stones on the ground. She picked one up because it was smooth and round and just the right size to fit in her hand. Her fingers closed on a rough surface that turned out to be a carved design. At first she couldn't make it out because the light kept moving, alternating with thick patches of shadow. She bent her head to inspect the thing more closely, but the wind squalled and whipped her hair across her face. "Zut!" she protested, stepping back to get shelter from one of the larger tree trunks. Mottled light fluttered over her palm as she turned the stone up again to see the perfectly carved shape of an eye looking back at her. Then the light strobed, the wind made a low moaning sound, and a shape came through the trees towards her. It was a man, a tall man with coils of hair in a knot on top of his head, a strange smile on his face, and something large and heavy dangling from his hand. She couldn't really see what it was, but there was a noise like heavy drops of rain falling on leaves, and when she looked at the ground, there were big dark red splashes on the green, and when she looked up again, the man was still smiling. He did not move, but the thing dangling from his hand was turning in the breeze. For a fleeting second Sylvie saw what it was, and then she didn't see anything as blind panic seized her and she ran, stumbling across the uneven ground, through the mass of leaves and branches, and out under the open sky again, onto the plain wide track of the ridgeway. She ran and ran, her breath coming in great painful noisy gasps, her steps slower and clumsier as the ground sloped upwards. A few anxious looks back confirmed there was no one following. Perhaps she had imagined the horrible man. At last she reached the White Horse Hill again, and making her way along the edge she could see clearly all around her, far into the distance. There were the boys, in plain view with the dog running ahead of them. She looked back. Coming towards her, a mere shadow on the horizon, but moving faster than any human being could run, was the long, thin figure of the man with coiled hair. Chapter 1. Saturday, 20th September, 1974. Bryony was already awake. She'd been lying there watching the light grow, listening to the low calls of the wood pigeons and thinking what a strangely peaceful place the world could be without the rattle of heavy buses and trucks right outside your window. When the phone rang just after 6, it was almost as if she'd been expecting it. She lay on her back for a minute after the call ended. Quarter of an hour she'd been given, to be up and ready for collection. It was enough, especially when there was no cold to contend with. Getting up when the air was so temperate you didn't need a dressing gown was a slightly dreamy experience anyway. She had to remind herself to keep to time as she went through the routine. Kettle on, brush teeth, and wash during the 3 minutes boiling time. Make tea, brush hair, and pull on clothes while it brews. Pour tea, adding a dash of cold water so you can drink it faster. Grab bag and keys, and out the door as the car draws up. The streets were empty as they sped down Headington Hill and skirted the roundabout before Magdalen Bridge. Oxford in September, with the stone towers turning gold in the morning sun, was a world away from the increasingly mad crush of Piccadilly and the faceless building in the dingy Vine Street cul-de-sac where she'd worked for the past 3 years. The car screeched as they rounded the corner by Carfax Tower, reminding her that the peace was fragile. And as they sped down Cornmarket Street and through St. Giles, she began to collect her thoughts and feel the adrenaline pump through her own system, preparing for what was to come. The great Victorian houses of North Oxford made an unlikely setting for violence, but you could never tell where it would erupt. And you could never be sure of your own reactions, however experienced you were. The transition from being the junior on a major investigation team in central London to being a senior member of staff in a provincial force hadn't been exactly smooth, especially as she was a newcomer working with officers who knew this town intimately. Apart from putting up with the conventional resistance to a woman as detective inspector, she encountered some resentment for being, as they thought, the favourite of the new detective chief superintendent, Macready. Macready was Bryony's former boss and had persuaded her to be transferred with him when he was moved to Thames Valley headquarters. But this was familiarity, she'd been trying to tell her new colleagues, not favouritism. Macready liked to hang on to his team, but it didn't stop him giving them a tough time. She still got the same crusty reception whenever she went in to see him. He'd be sure to keep a critical eye on the way she handled this case, and so would those she was giving orders to. She was relieved to see that the officer waiting to greet her as the car lurched to a halt was Sergeant Canning, one of the traditional school with an impeccable sense of professional courtesy. Number 4 Alcuin Close was modest compared with other houses in the area, but anywhere else it would have seemed a mansion. Bryony stepped out onto the gravel forecourt and looked up at it. 3 stories, large bay windows and a double front door with polished brass fittings. Old money. Oxford was awash with it. She followed Canning through the door into a hallway bigger than her own sitting room, with an expanse of polished floor that caught the early sun through a fanlight over the door. There were several people in a room to the right of them, but the sergeant was heading purposefully towards the second doorway on the left, where a foot was sticking out, heel upwards, in a clean white sock. The foot belonged to the small, neat body of a girl. She looked barely adult, dressed in blue jeans and a striped T-shirt. She had fallen forward across the threshold of the room and lay face down, one leg outstretched and the other slightly bent, an arm caught underneath the torso, as if she were asleep. But there was a mess of tangled hair and blood where the head should have been. Bryony crouched down to look at the edges of the dark pool, which had evidently stopped spreading a while ago. It had coagulated at the edges. Forensics on their way. Yes, ma'am. Should be here any minute. Canning was visibly shaken. Only a young one. 17 years old, apparently. Dr. Gleeson in there found the body. Sylvia Len Beck. He read the name from his notepad, mouthing each syllable carefully. Body hasn't been officially identified, of course, but Gleeson says it's their au pair girl. Is he a medical doctor? I gather not. Philosopher or something. They're all called doctor round here, or professor. I'm going to check the doors. I hope the front door hasn't got your fingerprints all over it." By way of reply, he held up a gloved hand.
"But we're pretty sure the assailant came in the back. Back door was wide open, apparently. Gleeson says he shut it when he came down first thing."
He led her through the hallway, where there was a small table with an ornately styled white telephone. At the back of the house was a sunroom with faded chintz-covered furniture. A more recent extension to the building, probably, and Bryony glimpsed a very new-looking kitchen to her right, with a narrow old staircase leading upwards nearby.
"Gleeson came down that way," said Canning, "and went into the kitchen to make himself some tea, following his usual routine, he says, and then went out through the door into the hallway and saw the foot sticking out. We got the call at 5:50.
"He gets up early, this Dr. Gleeson, then. I take it there's a Mrs. Gleeson," said Bryony. "And children? You usually have an au pair to help look after the kids, don't you?"
"There's 2 boys, twins, aged 8. Their mother took them out of the house immediately, gone to her sister's place in Woodstock. Gleeson says she didn't want to let them see the body."
Bryony moved over to the windows and looked out at the garden. A reddish-brown, long-haired dog was sniffing about at the far end of it. "Has that dog been out there all the time?"
"Couldn't say, Inspector. I didn't want to ask Dr. Gleeson too many questions before you arrived."
"And these windows," she said, "they're wide open." They were sliding windows with aluminium frames, and since there was no breeze, it had not been obvious at first that they were all pushed back as far as they would go. Some bustle around the front door announced the arrival of the forensics team. "You show them through," said Bryony. "I'll come and talk to them in a few minutes." She went up the back staircase to the first floor, where she was confronted by an array of wide-open doors. These were rooms from which people had fled. She walked past them rapidly. They could be explored later. The priority was to find the au pair's bedroom, which she guessed was on the top floor, reached by the main stairs at the front. If the sole residents were 3 adults and 2 children, many of the rooms had only occasional use at most. It would be an easy house to hide in. Bryony ran down again to the main hall, where Sergeant Canning was writing in his notebook. "Can you send a couple of men up here?" she said. "We need to have a PC on each floor. Tell them to wait here on the landing for further instructions. I'm going up to find the girl's bedroom. Looks like they kept her in the attic." Canning started to say something about reinforcements on the way, but she was already on hers, 2 steps at a time. The top floor was under the gabled roofline, with sloping ceilings and a narrower passageway. Here there were only 2 rooms. One was shut, and the other was obviously the girl's room, where a low window was flung wide open. The bed under it showed no signs of having been slept in. Its candlewick bedspread was neatly drawn up over the pillow. At the foot of the bed was a canvas backpack that had fallen forward and spilt some of its contents on the floor, a pink plastic cosmetics bag, 3 pairs of socks, a compass. A torch had rolled a little way under the bed, where it had come to rest next to a hiking boot lying on its side. The other boot was over behind the door. "Where were you going, Sylvie?" Bryony whispered to herself. Chapter 2. At 8 o'clock, Detective Superintendent Foster arrived with 3 more uniform officers, one of whom had the job of helping him out of the driving seat. Everyone knew Foster shouldn't really be out of hospital, let alone back at work. 16.5 stone, recent heart surgery, and a chronic smoker's cough were not the best qualifications for high-stress police work, but there was no keeping him out of it.
"We found an incident room,"
he announced, as Bryony met him in the hall.
"St. Aldate's haven't got room to swing a cat, but we'll need somewhere to sort this one out, even if it is just a domestic. And I've got you an assistant, Detective Constable Todd Elsingham. He'll be here later on this morning. We've had to recall him from leave. Got a lot of our best blokes on holidays still."
"I think we'll need 2 DCs on this job, sir," said Bryony. "It's looking complicated."
"What we need and what we get are 2 different things, Bryony. We're going to need an army up around the football ground this afternoon, but we're not going to get it. We'll be lucky if our team's as big as the one on the field."
He plonked himself on the chair that one of the constables had strategically placed behind him and took out a pack of cigarettes.
"The incident room's just around the corner in the Canterbury Road. It's supposed to be the Commonwealth Institute for something or other, but half of it's empty at this time of year. We used it a couple of months ago when we were investigating a homicide that occurred outside the Japanese library."
Foster inhaled deeply and shook his head as he breathed out smoke.
"Oh, you wouldn't think this would be a popular spot for homicides now, would you?"
"Any possibility they're related, sir?"
"Wouldn't think so, Bryony. That one was a shooting. Crime of passion. Motive, jealousy. Bit of a classic. We solved it in 3 days and the culprit's still behind bars to the best of my knowledge. Now,"
he broke off and looked around, cigarette poised.
"Get me an ashtray, Simpson. I'd hate to mess up this parquet floor. And tell Dr. What's-his-name to join us, if you'd be so kind."
The constable hovered, looking perplexed. "Do you mean Dr. Gleeson, sir?" asked Bryony. "He's being treated for shock at present."
No. I mean Dr. Pavan. You know, the nitpicker with the plum in his mouth. I assume he's turned up."
The constable went off down the hallway. "Dr. Pavantinandan," Bryony corrected. "He's a forensic specialist from the lab at Aldermaston."
"Pavan is fine,"
said a strong baritone voice from down the passageway. He appeared, pulling the cotton mask from his face with gloved hands. Foster turned pointedly, and with some effort, to nod a greeting in his direction, then looked back at Bryony.
"All right, you two. I have 10 minutes exactly. Fill me in."
"Well, sir," she said, "what we know so far is that the victim was found by Dr. Gleeson, who lives here with his wife and 2 boys and the family's au pair girl, Sylvie Hélène Beck. We assume she's the victim, but as the body is face down, an ID will have to be arranged later in the morgue." Foster cut in impatiently.
"In case some strange girl in the same clothes happened to find her way into the house just in time to get skittled, eh? So, Pavan, that's your department, I suppose. What's your story?" "It's rather too early for any story as such, sir. We have to wait and see what the evidence tells us, following the lab tests. But at this stage I am concentrating on the immediate location of the body. This is quite a large house, so if we are to conduct an effective forensic search for evidence of the killer's presence here, we will need to work through all the rooms, which will require either a lot of time or a larger team." "I've got you a DC and 2 extra constables," said Foster. "One of these lads has to come back with me, so that will have to do you, I'm afraid." "They are not qualified for forensic work, sir, so they will not be of assistance to me. Now, if you will excuse me." He turned and walked smartly back down the hallway. Foster snorted. "Got tickets on themselves, these forensic scientists. They're a growing breed, Bryony. But not a lot of use for the kind of thing I have to deal with up the Cowley Road. When the skinheads scrape someone's face down a wall, you don't usually have to look for evidence with a pair of tweezers. My advice to you, Williams, for what it's worth, is to leave Prince Pavan to do his stuff in the room down there and do a good old-fashioned search of the rest of the house yourself. All right, then. Can't dilly-dally round here. You'll have to manage pretty much on your own, but I expect you to keep me in the picture." He stuck out his elbows to signal to the constables either side of him that it was time for lift-off, and the 3rd officer opened the door for them and followed them out to the car. Bryony stood for a moment staring at a rose-edged patch of sunlight on the wooden floor. The colour tinge was thrown by the stained glass set into the fanlight. "I'll need a watch outside the front and back doors," she said, "and a search of the garden and the perimeters of the house for any signs of the way the killer got into the grounds." She caught the briefest exchange of glances before one of the men spoke. "I thought the superintendent said we were to do a search of the house, ma'am." "That's for me to decide. Right now, your job is to go round the neighbours, left, right and over the back, and ask if they saw anyone on their property last night. Then check their gardens and fences for signs of someone hopping over. But go carefully. We don't want you tramping over any valuable footprints." "No, ma'am." "Yes, ma'am," said the officer.
with a barely detectable smirk. Canning, his uniform still in an impeccable state, was sitting drinking tea at a highly polished dining table, with Gleeson slumped across it next to him, head in his hands. Bryony spoke quietly. "Dr. Gleeson?" He looked up, expressionless. It was a striking face, its strong bones made starker by the pallor of the skin and deep-set blue eyes. Long strands of pale hair fell forward over what you might tactfully call a high forehead. With 8-year-old twins, he was probably in his mid-30s, but apart from the premature balding, looked younger than that. She moved a few steps towards him. "I'm Inspector Bryony Williams. How are you feeling?" Gleeson slumped back without answering. "Suffering from shock," said Canning. "We gave him some sweet tea, but he brought it straight back up. I've offered to take him upstairs to the bedroom, but he says he prefers to stay here." Gleeson raised his face again, without changing the angle of his slump. "Unless you're keeping me company for some good reason," he said, "I'd prefer A, to be left alone, and B, to get as far away from this house as I can, as soon as possible." Bryony met his gaze. "I'm afraid we can't arrange either of those things immediately," she said. "We're going to have to ask you some questions. We can leave the formal interview until later in the day. But if you feel up to it, Dr. Gleeson, I'd like you to give me a tour of the house." He slapped his hands down on the table and pushed himself upright. "Very well." He held out his arms like an orchestra conductor. "This is the dining room, used about once every 6 months. Furniture, mahogany, late Victorian, not my taste, but I had nothing to do with its acquisition." He got up and pushed the chair out of his way. "Where would you like to go next?" Without waiting for an answer, he strode through the door at the back of the room. Bryony signalled for Canning to follow. The kitchen was large and modernised, but its clean lines were obscured by a litter of plates and mugs, opened packets, used cutlery and school exercise books, left from what looked like a troubled homework session. Pencils had rolled everywhere, and there were torn-out, crumpled pages on the floor. "Sorry about the mess. Sorry about the smell of puke. At least I managed to aim at the sink. OK, where to now?" "You came in here first thing this morning, before you found the body, is that right?" Bryony asked. Gleeson leaned on the kitchen table, the heel of his hand pressed into the open page of an exercise book with sums written out in childish figures. He spoke in aggressive bursts. "Got up, usual time, 5:30 or thereabouts. Made tea. Dog came bounding in, so I realised the back door had been left open again. I went to close it, came back through the hall and saw this white foot sticking out of the sitting-room doorway. Dog went up to sniff at it. I called her off and shut her out in the back garden. I thought she, Sylvie, not the dog, must have fainted or come in drunk or something. Then I saw what you must have seen in there, and I went straight back into the kitchen and I puked in the sink. Then I phoned the police, and this nice sergeant here came around and made a fresh pot of tea. That's about it from my point of view, apart from the rapid evacuation of my wife and the boys." He pulled a kitchen stool towards him, scraping it heavily across the tiled floor, and rested one knee across the top of it, showing a frayed rip in his trousers. His shirt, half tucked in, had only 3 buttons done up. Bare feet. It was the look of someone who might have pulled on his clothes in a tearing hurry, to respond to an alarm, perhaps. Bryony wondered about his story. 5:30 was pretty early for a regular start to the day. She decided not to test him now. There were other things she needed to know, and it would be easier to keep the information flowing if she avoided putting him on his guard. She perched on a stool opposite him. "I know this is difficult for you, Dr. Gleeson. You're in shock. Let's get it over with so you can have a rest before we do an interview. I need you to show me each room in the house and identify anything in it that is at all changed or unusual." "OK, as you say, let's get it over with. But God knows why I have to be interviewed. I've already pretty much put you in the picture." "An interview is essential, I'm afraid, and it must be today because we have to proceed with as full as possible an understanding of the circumstances Sylvie was found in." His expression hardened, but he said nothing, Bryony led the way back through the dining room into the hallway, and Gleeson followed, with Canning bringing up the rear. "Let's start at the front," she said briskly. "The front door was closed, I take it."
"Front door was closed," he repeated, in the tone of a rude schoolboy.
"And these two doors here?" She pointed to the doors of the two front rooms, either side of them. He gave a curt nod.
"Yep."
She drew on a plastic glove and opened both doors herself. Gleeson marched into the room on the right, which was flooded with light from a large window divided into squared panes. There was a view onto the driveway, framed by a climbing rose outside, its pink flowers echoing the pink velvet of the chairs. Very pretty, thought Bryony, and quite lifeless.
"Sitting room,"
said Gleeson.
"I don't use it much. My wife holds chatties with her friends in here, and reads those things."
He pointed to some fashion magazines on the coffee table and turned back across the hall to the room opposite. Here there was an upright piano with a cello leaning against the wall beside it. 3 music stands were arranged in a triangle in the centre of the room. The window along the side wall was recessed and hung with long floral curtains. Examining the sash, Bryony noticed that the locks had been painted over. Evidently the window had not been opened for some time, or cleaned. The glass was mottled and hazy. "Is there a path down the side of the house?" she asked.
"Used to be, but the bushes have grown over it. You can't get round that way, if that's what you're wondering. The garage blocks it off."
Bryony turned and noticed that Gleeson seemed paler than ever, and his forehead was sweating. "Are you feeling all right, Dr. Gleeson? Would you like to sit down for a moment?"
"There's nothing I'd like less than to sit down in here, thank you very much. Let's just get on with it. Not much I can tell you about this room that isn't obvious. My wife teaches piano and violin."
Bryony wondered if "my wife" had a name. "Who are her students?"
"Pupils," he said. "Boys, and a couple of girls, from the schools around here. And if you need to know more about them, you'll have to ask her. Lessons from 4 to 5:30 pretty much every afternoon. I try to be out because of the racket. Sylvie's supposed to help the boys with their homework while it's going on."
"I noticed the books in the kitchen," said Bryony. "Were they doing homework last night?"
"Maths coaching."
"They have maths coaching even on the weekend?"
"Fridays at 4:30. The best coach is heavily booked, and that's the only time he's available. Where to next? You've seen the dining room, and I hope you're not going to take me back in there."
He gestured at the wall between them and the room where the body lay. "Perhaps not right now," agreed Bryony. "Just tell me what that room is used for."
"Family museum, basically. This house is my wife's. She inherited it from her grandfather, who was an entomologist, specialised in stick insects. There's a whole collection in there, pinned under glass in display drawers. He had the cabinets specially made. And there's his microscope collection. They're valuable. Some of them are 18th century.
"Why would Sylvie have gone in there?"
"Don't ask me. She's no business to go anywhere, except the kitchen and the sunroom. Neither have I. At least nowhere on this floor."
"Let's go and look at the bedrooms," Bryony said. She led the way up the front stairs and stopped by the entrance to the first room on the left. "I assume this is the children's room," she said. All that was visible through the doorway was an expanse of bare wooden floor. But when she stepped inside, she saw bunk beds on the far wall, with children's pyjamas strewn around nearby. There was nothing else here for children. No other furniture, no signs of toys or activities of any kind. But across the landing was an equally large room, full of clutter. "Did Sylvie put the boys to bed?" He shrugged.
"How would I know? I didn't get home till 10.
Questions were massing by the dozen in Bryony's mind. Not now, she told herself. Stick to finding out about the house. "And the room opposite?"
"Full of useless furniture, mainly. The boys play hide-and-seek in there. It's supposed to be the guest room. There's a spare bed, but we try not to make it too inviting. Just encourages the in-laws to descend on us."
The bathroom was next, large and expensively fitted out in white and chrome, but like the kitchen, a mess. There were crumpled towels on the floor, wet socks hanging from a makeshift line over the bath, and assorted cosmetics around the edges of the basin. The last two rooms were the study and the Gleesons' bedroom, both with their doors wide open. In the bedroom, Bryony registered general disorder. It was as if sheets, blankets and dressing gowns had been deliberately flung in all directions. She also noticed that the alarm hand on the clock had been set to 7:30. The study was more like a library, with floor-to-ceiling shelves of books against all the walls, and by the window a desk with more books piled on it, and some papers with a large glass paperweight containing a petrified butterfly. Its wings were a glorious peacock blue. There were piles of papers and files stacked on the floor, together with boxes of scrolled documents. "Is this all exactly as you left it?"
"I should say so." He sat down heavily on the desk chair. "Look, I've had enough of this, if you don't mind. Can we finish it later? There's nothing on the top floor except Sylvie's bedroom and the storeroom. What are you trying to achieve with this anyway?"
"Two things," she said. "I'm trying to ascertain whether there is any room in the house where an intruder might have hidden, and I need to know if there are any signs of disturbance. Anything not in its usual place."
"Not that I've noticed."
"You said that when you went downstairs this morning, the back door was open again."
"Sylvie. She got some neurotic thing about doors and windows. Always opening them. Damn nuisance, actually. Even the front door. Claustrophobia."
Bryony exchanged glances with Canning. "We'll leave the upper story for now," she said. "Just show us exactly where you went when you got up this morning." Chapter 3.
"The body is being removed at 11, and I want to be at the morgue by 12:30, said Pavan. "So if we need to do any work in the other rooms, we have a bit of time now." He was sitting on the children's swing, making gentle circles as he drank his coffee. Bryony had a mug of tea and a ginger biscuit, every movement of which was being tracked by the Gleasons' dog, which sat to attention in front of her. She broke off a piece and held it out. It was gone in a flash, acknowledged by a flurry of russet tail.
"Poor thing," said Bryony. "I don't suppose she had any breakfast."
"Dogs aren't supposed to have breakfast. They should be fed once a day at sunset. At least that is a traditional view in India, where a dog is lucky to get fed at all. But it doesn't take account of the very long summer twilights in this part of the world. What's her name, do you know?"
"Toffee. She's a cross between a red setter and a Labrador."
Pavan's eyes widened. "You impress me. Is this information something already revealed at interview?"
"We haven't interviewed Gleason yet. At least not formally. Canning's been chatting with him. Canning knows all about dogs, it turns out. He and his wife breed poodles."
"Poodles?" Pavan beamed widely. "I can't imagine a foursquare Englishman like Canning with a poodle, can you?"
"Patience is one of his virtues. He might well be rather good at clipping poodles."
Pavan laughed as he threw the remains of his coffee over the grass, then sprang to his feet. "Wouldn't you like to try this?" He held the swing for her. "The rocking motion is rather soothing. Go on."
"No, thanks."
"Perhaps the charm for me is a symptom of a deprived childhood," he said. "We never had a swing, did you?"
"Yes, a rather nice one. It was yellow, but I'm afraid it doesn't conjure up happy memories. Let's get back in there." She nodded her head in the direction of the house. "I want you to have a look at Sylvie's bedroom, and the other room on the top floor. But first, tell me what you found out so far."
"There's a limit to what I can say with any confidence until we've done the autopsy," he said. "But a couple of things are immediately evident. The skull has been smashed by a blow to the back of the head. No other injuries are apparent. Have you any idea of the force it takes to break a human skull from that angle? It is rare for a blow to the head with a blunt instrument to be the direct cause of death, which it would appear to be in this case. As you've seen, the damage is massive."
"So what kind of weapon are we looking for?" she said.
"At this stage, all we can conjecture is that it was an object of some weight, and that the person wielding it was exceptionally strong. Quite exceptionally. I have never seen anything like this."
"I presume there are no signs of sexual assault?"
"None."
"Then why? A 17-year-old girl, barely more than 5 foot tall. What's she done to have stirred up all that violent force? Why her? Pavan was silent for a moment, watching a bird peck at something on the lawn.
Bryony, you learn many distressing things in our profession. One of them is just how much force it takes to kill any human being, even a child.
There was silence between them for a moment before he continued.
Here, the force was out of all proportion. It is true. But perhaps the assailant was looking for someone else and poor Sylvie got in the way.
Bryony glanced at him, as if to check that their speculations were on the same wavelength. Looking for who? Colin Gleeson? He arched his eyebrows. We're going to have to play it very carefully with Gleeson, she continued. He'll naturally be on the suspect list, but if he was the intended victim, he may also know a lot more than he wants to tell us. I'm wondering whether Canning may get some useful stuff out of him, just with the small talk. I'm leaving the official interview till after I've talked to his wife. As soon as D.C. Elsingham arrives, I'll get him to do some background checks at Gleeson's college, so we'll know more about him than he thinks. That way we'll have a good idea of whether he's playing it straight. Even as she said this, Bryony sensed she was betraying her lack of confidence by a need to show that she knew what she was doing. She looked at her watch. We'd better get on with it. She led the way back inside and up to the top floor, speaking as they climbed the stairs. The rooms where someone could have been hiding are Gleeson's study and the spare bedroom on this floor. She pointed out the relevant doors. And an unused room at the top, next to the girl's bedroom. They climbed the last flight of stairs. Pavan, who had pulled his gloves on already, was peering at the handle of the closed door through a magnifying glass.
This has been opened recently, he said, and whatever is in here must interest the dog. You don't need a magnifying glass to see these.
He pointed to scratch marks in the wood, around the handle and at the base of the door, which opened to reveal an empty room with sunlight pouring from a side window across the unvarnished floorboards.
Nice little room. What a waste to leave it empty like this. It's also reasonably clean. If it were totally neglected, the dust would be thicker here.
He ran a fingertop across the window ledge.
You see, this is recent.
Bryony pushed the door to, meaning to check for locks on the inside, and jumped back. Jeepers, what's that? Pavan started in response. Then his expression changed to one of radiant curiosity.
It won't hurt you, Bryony, trust me. It's a Lord Howe Island stick insect.
The creature, nearly a foot long, and with sharply angled limbs that looked set for pouncing, was settled on the pale wood of the inner frame on the door, where it might have found complete camouflage but for the direct sunlight that now fell on it. Bryony took a couple more steps back. Yes, I can see it's a stick insect. But how on earth do you know where it's from?
The Lord Howe Island stick insect is something of a celebrity. As a species, that is. I studied it in biology when I was doing my undergraduate degree.
Well, Gleeson just told us that his wife's grandfather was an expert on them. There are supposed to be drawers full of dead ones downstairs. Do you reckon this is a sole escapee? Or are we likely to come across his family and friends all over the house? And what do we do with it? Leave it there? Take it in for questioning?
I'd be inclined to collect it for examination, if only out of personal curiosity.
You shouldn't mix work with pleasure, Pavan, don't you know that? He crouched to look at the floor.
Actually, the dog has paid a few visits.
He pointed to a scattering of bronze hairs.
And now we know what was interesting her.
The door had a bolt on the inside, which slid easily into place. After looking at it with a magnifying glass, Pavan said it had been in recent use.
Someone has been locking themselves in here.
Could be a hiding place for the boys, said Bryony. I get the impression they're quite a handful.
But the bolts on this window are also running smooth.
It was a sash window and slid up easily. Bryony stuck her head out and saw that the wall around it was covered in ivy. Directly below was the roof of the shed that blocked off traffic between the front and back gardens. Someone could climb up here without much difficulty, she said. But why bother, when they could just wander in the back door?
Perhaps she had a nocturnal visitor she didn't want the Gleesons to know about.
Perhaps. She didn't sound convinced. Pavan moved to examine the door of Sylvie's room. "No lock," he said, "and the handle doesn't work. It doesn't even latch, so anyone could just push it open without making a sound." Inside the room they stood for a moment, taking in the details of an ordinary girl's life. A record player on the floor with a pile of LPs stacked neatly beside it against the wall. A dressing table on which were a used coffee cup, a purple hairbrush, a curling wand, a tray of assorted eyeshadows, and an uncapped mascara brush. The wooden chair facing the mirror was draped with a bath towel, and next to it was a tin waste bin containing the packaging for a set of batteries and some cotton wool balls. Bryony picked up one of the boots she'd noticed before. "These things with the deep tread soles have become fashion items. Doesn't look as if she's worn them much. No rich country dirt for you to analyse. But it looks as if she was planning to collect some." She nodded towards the capsized backpack. Pavan dusted the contents for fingerprints as he laid them out. A tightly rolled sleeping bag, toothbrush, penknife, tin mug, a bra and 3 pairs of pants, 3 of socks, 3 T-shirts, a pullover, an unused notebook with a picture of Miss Piggy on the front, a tube of Savlon cream, the torch and the compass. Pavan opened the penknife. "This hasn't been used, and the batteries have been bought for the torch, which is also a recent purchase. She was going camping, but by the looks of it she was new to the experience. She wouldn't have got far with this." He held out the compass on the palm of his hand. "It's no better than a toy." And its owner was no more than a child. Bryony was finding it a battle to keep her professional side to the fore in this. She'd had plenty of experience on murder cases in her short career, and seen it all, as some people might say. But still, now and again you found yourself in a case that got right through that protective shell of training and experience. She stared at the shiny blue plastic of Sylvie's makeup bag, and thought of her picking it out from the shelves in Boots, attracted by its glossy surface. Yes, just a child. Slowly she began to pull out the contents and tried to push away the personal images they evoked. When she heard the front door go downstairs, she sensed that Pavan too was glad of a tension breaker. "That should be the undertaker," he said, jumping to his feet. "I assume you wish to be present at the removal of the body." 2 men stood in the hallway with a stretcher, and Pavan swept past, beckoning them to follow. He walked around the body and crouched down by the right shoulder. "We'll have to turn her," he said. All 4 of them were involved in the operation of turning the body over so as to minimize disturbance to the limbs. Bryony registered that the girl's face was already distorted by rigor mortis, and that the bent elbow remained rigid. The fingers of her hand were clasped around an object. "I think we should see what she's holding," she said. Pavan bent to look more closely. "Better to remove it now, I agree." He lifted the fine, undamaged fingers one by one, easing them away so that he could slide the object out. He handed it to Bryony. It was a stone, a smooth, pale, rounded stone, just big enough to cover the palm of her gloved hand. She turned it over. The other side was engraved minutely with letters in a continuous line that ran in a densely packed coil from the outer edge to the centre, where there was etched the shape of an eye, sharply detailed, the iris cross-hatched, and the pupil bored deep into the surface, revealing something glinting blackly from its centre. Chapter 4. D.C. Elsingham arrived just before noon, looking as if he had not been expecting to be called in to work today. The flared brown hipster trousers and zipped cotton jacket did not make the kind of ensemble a plain-clothes cop was encouraged to wear, and he seemed slightly self-conscious as he shook hands. "Sorry I couldn't get here earlier," he said. "I was recalled from holidays. Wife and I were staying in London. I didn't have a chance to go home and change. Where would you like me to start?" Bryony liked the direct manner and the way he met her eye, but also registered that he seemed rather full of himself, with his fashionably cut hair and an unnecessarily broad smile. Perhaps he didn't appreciate the seriousness of the case he'd been assigned to. After briefing him as rapidly as she could, she handed him the passport she had just found in Sylvie's dressing table. "It's the only photo we have of her so far. Get it copied, will you? and we'll need to ask Interpol to arrange contact with the next of kin. Then I want some checks done on Gleeson. He's a fellow of Queen's College, so we should talk to a few people there in the next couple of hours. I want to know his usual schedule, and who he was friends with, that sort of thing, and who he might have been with last night at the college dinner. Meet me here again at 2, because I'll need you to be present at the interview with Mrs. Gleeson in Woodstock. He was back half an hour ahead of time. There was no one around much in the college, but I had a chat with the porter. They normally know more than anyone else about the comings and goings. Luckily, he was on late duty last night because they had a couple of celebrity guests at the dinner. He says Gleeson was one of the last to leave, about 11:15. Likes to be there to make sure the port's finished, apparently. So he was drunk? More than a bit tipsy, were the exact words used, and nothing unusual about that, I gather. Now, other things I found out. He recited these from memory, checking them off on his fingers. Been a fellow of the college since 1967, moral philosopher, whatever that is. Gleeson has rooms up the number 9 staircase in the old building off the quad. Teaches Mondays, Wednesdays and Thursdays during term, and works on his books in the vacations, or used to. Porter says he's gone downhill a bit, and maybe everything isn't right at home, by which I take him to mean marriage is on the rocks. Drink's becoming a regular problem, stays in his rooms in the evenings, sometimes till after 8. That's about it, really. So, where to now? Is the photograph being copied? Yes, should be ready by 4, in time for tomorrow's Oxford mail. Bryony had been feeling increasingly uncomfortable about the cavalier style of his report, but this set off an alarm bell. Just a minute. What gave you the idea that it's for the newspapers? Well, that's the usual thing. I know a couple of the reporters. I can give the basic story, but they'll want all the details they can get, of course. She's pretty even in that little photo, so they'll like as not want to put her on the front page. Bryony drew a deep breath. Let me make something very clear to you, Detective Constable Elsingham. If anyone is to speak to the press, it will be expressly on my instructions. I haven't given any such instructions, and I have no intention of giving them for the time being. The photograph is for display in the incident room and is to be copied for the officers who will be asked to make local inquiries. She felt such intense pressure in saying this that she wondered for a second if she might have overdone the authority bit, but he seemed quite unconcerned. Fine. It's just that Superintendent Foster told me he needed a bit of local experience on this job because you're new to Oxford. I'm used to working with the press, so I kind of assumed you'd want me to take care of that side of things. The drive to Woodstock took less than half an hour, but the route marked a sharp transition from the spreading Victorian grandeur of North Oxford to an older, simpler world. Dry stone walls lined the road, and the houses, built in the same Cotswold stone, were modest and compact, many of them with thatched roofs. The fields were a vivid, almost fluorescent green. "Pretty, isn't it?" said Elsingham. "Sometimes I think I'd like to live out this way, but then again, could be deadly boring. I like a bit of excitement, which is probably what got me into this line of work, you know. Well, you live and learn, eh? But I must say a case like this is a bit of a refreshing change from the usual duffings up over the other side of town. It'd be nothing new to you, though, I dare say. You worked on Macready's team at the Met, that right?" "For the past 3 years," said Bryony. Elsingham shook his head. "Can't do much better than that. Old Macready, eh?" One thing Macready could never tolerate was idle chat, and Bryony had come to feel uncomfortable with it herself. On a difficult case, concentration was everything. Could she trust Elsingham to keep the focus in a vital interview? "Angela Gleeson may be in a bit of a state," she said. "Leave the first part of the interview to me. If I want you to take over, I'll signal accordingly. Otherwise, no interruptions, okay?" Angela Gleeson managed to look harried and perfectly groomed at the same time. She was thin rather than slim. Her skin was dry and pale, with fine lines collecting around the mouth and eyes, and her hair was cut like that of a fashion model, in a sharp, glossy bob. She wore a pale linen trouser suit with short sleeves and slip-on sandals in which her fine-boned feet were displayed at an elegant angle as she sat, legs crossed, on the oversized sofa. Brittle was the word that came to Bryony's mind, the kind of woman who was going to be difficult to interview at any time. She offered a strained, token smile in response to Bryony's greeting. I'm sorry about this, Mrs. Gleeson. I know you've had a shock, and you may not feel like answering questions right now, but we must gather as much information as we can about the circumstances of Sylvie's death. How long has she been living with you? Since the beginning of February. She's the second au pair we've had. The first one, Katrin, was a bit more mature and capable. Sylvia's only just 17. We've had rather a lot of problems with her. To tell you the truth, I thought she was altogether unsuitable. She really couldn't manage the boys, and I'm sure you've seen what a mess the house is in. I'll have to ask you some more about Sylvie in a minute. First, I want to go through the details of last night. Were you at home all evening? Yes. I got back at 4, so the children would be in time for their maths lesson. I didn't go out again. Who teaches them maths? Leonard Croydon. And was he friendly at all with Sylvie? Not especially. I don't suppose they'd have had anything in common. Good God, you're not going to suspect him, are you? Suspect lists are a technical matter to the police, Mrs. Gleeson. They are based, at least to begin with, simply on who was where at what time. When did Leonard Croydon leave? 5:30. And was Sylvie at home then? I imagine so. I can't be absolutely sure, I'm afraid. I assumed she was in her room. She came down at about... The eyes scanned the wall opposite, as if it would provide her with the information. I suppose about 7 o'clock. She made a phone call. To whom? I don't know. How long was she on the phone? Mrs. Gleeson raised her eyebrows in a pained expression, put the palm of her hand to her forehead, then swiftly took it away again and locked her hands over one of her knees. Oh, goodness, how should I know? I took absolutely no notice. It can't have been very long, because I remember she came into the kitchen to make herself some toast. I asked her what time she was leaving, because she was supposed to be going away for the weekend. She has weekends away every few weeks, arranged by the organisation that manages her programme here. Amitiés. They give the girls English classes during term time, and sometimes take them on coach trips to do sightseeing. So she had been on these trips before? How often? I think this was to be the 4th. I must say it was very short notice. I thought it was a bit rich, actually, announcing on Wednesday evening that she was going away on Friday. Usually she leaves on Saturday morning, but apparently this one was supposed to start on Friday night. She said the coach was collecting them from St. Giles at 8 o'clock, and she left the house at 7:30 to be in plenty of time for it. Perhaps she was just ringing out one of the others to check on the time. Was she carrying anything? Oh, I think just the usual things she took with her on those trips. A sort of rucksack with a lot of straps. So she must have returned to the house later on. When was that? The eyes widened. I have absolutely no idea. I had no idea she even came back to the house. It was probably after I went to bed. Angela Gleeson had spent the evening in the sunroom with the twins, who were allowed to watch some god-awful cowboy film as a Friday night treat. The windows, she insisted, were open only enough to let in some of the breeze. When the film ended, the boys had gone to bed. Bryony probed a little to find out whether there was any possibility the boys might have seen something of what happened downstairs later, but Mrs. Gleeson was quite insistent. They were asleep. She had gone in at 9:30 to check, before going to bed herself because she had a headache. She didn't want the boys interviewed if it could possibly be avoided. They have very vivid imaginations, she said. It's not good for them to be thinking about murders, especially in their own home. Her voice faltered as she said this. I expect we can leave them out of it for now, at least, if you're sure they were in bed. What time did your husband get home? Angela Gleeson extracted a folded tissue from the pocket of her jacket, and Bryony wondered for a moment if she was going to break down. But the glacial manner held, and the tissue was used only to dab at the edges of her carefully made-up eyes and mouth. I couldn't say exactly. It was hard to judge whether she was holding anything back. On the matter of Sylvie's friends and associates, she could give almost no information. I suppose she made some friends in her English classes. She went out, usually in the evenings, a couple of times a week, so I assume she met people then. She was free on Sundays, and sometimes went off for the day. Where did she go? There was a light shrug of the shoulders.
She was quite cagey about her social life, but I had no reason to think she was in bad company or anything of that sort.
She didn't bring friends back to the house?
Not to my knowledge.
What's the likelihood of her having visitors without your knowledge? Maybe a special visitor. In her bedroom at night.
Almost nil, I'd say. There was absolutely nothing sophisticated about her. The one person I know she saw regularly was her counsellor.
Do you know who that is?
No, I don't think she ever mentioned a name. The only reason I know about it at all was that she had to have time off on Thursday afternoon.
Do you know why she was seeing a counsellor? There was a prolonged pause, and the hand went up to the forehead again.
Look, do we really have to have all this out now? I'm feeling rather exhausted, to tell you the truth, and I still haven't shaken off my migraine.
Perhaps she would respond better to male attention, Bryony wondered, and she gave the signal to Elsingham.
"We can take a break if you like, Mrs. Gleeson," he said. "But everything you can tell us is going to help. We want to catch this lunatic, don't we? The quicker we get after him, the better."
She sighed demonstratively.
"Very well, I suppose you'd better carry on."
Sounds as if Sylvia was having some problems. Any idea what they were?
I don't know about problems as such. I think for the last couple of months she was really rather disturbed. Goodness knows what went on in her mind, but she always seemed to be frightened, and recently it became just impossible. She was convinced she was being shut in. Then she started leaving the doors open, even the front door. You see, she was really too young to be an au pair. I kept telling Colin, my husband, we should have sent her back. She was a liability. I mean, what if they start trying to blame us now?
Here, for the first time, her voice shook.
I mean, what on earth were we supposed to do about her? That organisation she came with were about as much use as a hole in the head. They wouldn't even help us to find her a psychiatrist. This counsellor she found for herself didn't seem to be doing her any good at all. As I said, she was getting worse. To be honest, it was a relief when she said she was going away for the weekend. I was starting to think I'd need a psychiatrist myself.
"That went well,"
said Elsingham, brightly, as he fired up the ignition. Bryony wondered for a second if he was being ironic, but he added,
"I think she did her best in the circumstances, don't you?"
"For us or for Sylvie?" asked Bryony dryly.
"In the interview, I meant."
Perhaps, she realised, this was his first experience of an investigation involving interviews of this type. His background and hers were poles apart, and she was going to have to make some allowances for that. "We'll have to talk to her again after we've explored Gleeson's end of the story. And I may need to talk to the boys."
"So, what's our plan for Gleeson's interview?"
Instead of answering, Bryony began to make rapid notes, listing the follow-up inquiries for what they'd learned so far. Elsingham cast the odd sideways glance at the page as she worked, and a couple of times seemed about to say something. That's right, thought Bryony, learn to think before you speak. But evidently this did not come naturally to him.
"Can I make a suggestion, Inspector?"
"I'm sure you're about to do so, DC Elsingham." This was a Macready reply, and Bryony almost winced as she heard herself come out with it.
"It's about the interview with Gleeson. What if I start off? I mean, given what I already know about his movements last night."
"You won't be there, Detective Constable. I've got some other work for you to do."
"Oh? What's that, then?"
She took a deep breath. "Get on to the telephone exchange. If possible, we have to trace that call she made from the house at 7 o'clock. Contact the French police and check that they've informed Sylvie's parents, who will need to be asked about this claustrophobia problem. Did she have it before she came here? Get in touch with Amitiés to determine the dates of those trips and find out who in the organisation knew her best. See if we can identify who it was she called last night. Contact the maths tutor."
"Leonard Croydon?"
"Yes. Find if he has an alibi, and if so, check it out. And we need to track down this counsellor she was seeing. Get a list of registered counsellors, psychiatrists and psychologists in the Oxford area."
"That should keep me busy, eh?" There's probably more nut doctors in Oxford, per head of population at least, than anywhere else in England.
They drew up at a red light, and Elsingham drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. He was annoyed, perhaps, at being put in his place. Better for her to do it sooner than later, since she was already having enough trouble asserting her authority. But as they took off again, the taps on the steering wheel became more pronounced, setting up a jaunty rhythm. Then he started to whistle, or at least to hiss out the tune through his teeth. The words echoed instantly in Bryony's mind. "I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay." She went back to her notes and tried to concentrate. After a couple of minutes, he stopped.
"Hope you don't mind me whistling, Inspector. Just got a tune in my head. You know how it is. An idea pops up, and that's how it takes you."
"What idea?"
"Lumberjack. When you told me what Pavan—"
"You mean Dr. Pavantanandan?"
"Yeah. When you told me what he said about the force used on that little girl, well, for some reason, I just thought, lumberjack. Why don't we call him the lumberjack? Code name."
"Why don't you concentrate on the road, Elsingham, or we'll both end up wrapped around a tree?" There was silence for a couple of minutes, and again she wondered if she'd taken the wind out of his sails. Apparently not.
"You know what?"
"What?"
"Some of the lads have been saying Pavan fancies you."
Bryony felt herself blushing and turned to look out of the window. "Some of the lads'll say anything."
"That's right, they will. Some of them say you fancy him."
"Well, tell the lads where they can get off. I've worked with him on a couple of cases before, and I get on well with him, that's all."
"One for the glamour girls, Pavan. That's his reputation."
"Oh, is he?" Bryony thought to herself. Elsingham was already moving on to his next topic.
"Bit of a legend, eh, Macready? What's he really like, then?"
Bryony pictured Macready in his brogue shoes and buttoned-up overcoat, standing at the door of Vine Street Station in the rain, flapping his great black umbrella to shake off the raindrops, rolling it swiftly and pitching it into the umbrella stand like a javelin. He was a dead shot. "How should I know?" she said.
"Because you worked with him."
"Yes, I was part of his team for nearly 3 years, as a matter of fact, but that doesn't mean I know what he's really like."
"Bit of a mystery, then?"
"Oh, not exactly a mystery, just good at keeping people at a distance."
"Like you."
"D.C. Elsingham, are you in the habit of asking your superior officers a great load of personal questions?"
"OK," he said. "I get the message. Put a sock in it. But this isn't the Met, you know. We're a much smaller outfit around here, and we're used to talking straight to each other. Even the superintendent. He's a local man. Never had any tickets on himself. Lets us take the Michael, you know."
Bryony didn't know what to say, so she tried Macready's favourite tactic, silence. Elsingham started drumming at the leather-covered steering wheel and whistling another tune. Chirpy, chirpy, cheep, cheep. "Are you trying to drive me nuts?" she burst out.
"That's better, Inspector. Bit of a short fuse is only natural on someone who started work at 6.
6:15, she said. "What time did they call you?"
"About an hour after that."
"I'm sorry we interrupted your holiday," she said. The road in front of them was straightening out now, with a view over the fields either side. She looked at her watch. Better step on it. Chapter 5. The incident room was in the basement of a house that made the Gleasons look modest. This one would practically have accommodated a whole police station. Its regular tenant was the Institute for Commonwealth Languages, but at this time of year, the caretaker explained, very few of the rooms were occupied. The basement was used mainly for seminars and consisted of a large open area with chairs and tables arranged in a circle and 2 small adjoining rooms behind glass partitions.
"How much more convenient could it be?" Canning remarked. "These 2 rooms are used for translation, apparently. Look, tape recorders, phones." He knocked on the glass. "Special glazing, see? They're soundproof. We can use one for your office and the other as an interview room. And there's a little kitchen around there, all modcons. It's a darn sight better conditions than we've got up in St Aldate's these days. We've started a file card system here for recording follow-up information. The blackboards will do for displaying the photos when they come back from the morgue. Pavan says he can be ready for a general briefing by 9 tomorrow morning. Will that be all right?"
"Yes. Now what about Gleeson? I'd rather talk to him here, said Bryony. There's too many games he can play when he's in his own house. And if you're up to it, I'd like you to be present.
I hope you wouldn't have any doubts on whether I'm up to it, Inspector.
None at all, Sergeant Canning, except that I know you've been on duty continuously since 10 last night. Gleeson was brought round by car, looking only slightly less dishevelled than he had in the morning, from which Bryony concluded that maybe the unbuttoned shirt and half-mast trousers were his usual style. He wore sandals, but hadn't bothered to buckle the straps. Canning poured him a glass of water.
"No use to me without any whiskey in it,"
Gleeson remarked. The interview started smoothly enough with questions about the morning. Yes, he insisted, 5:30 was his usual time to get up.
"Got a bloody book to write. When else am I supposed to do it? With 2 8-year-olds going berserk around the place and a parade of tone-deaf teenagers coming in to play the piano, I have to concentrate. It's the only time the place is quiet."
Bryony changed tack. "Where does the dog sleep?"
"In the shed. I usually call her in when I come down, likes to share my toast. Then she comes up and sits with me in the study for a couple of hours."
"Did she seem agitated when you first saw her?"
"Hard to say. She's always a bit excited when I call her. Very flattering, given the profound indifference of anyone else in the house. All I remember is she came rollicking up. Then as I closed the back door, she ran into the hall and found... well," he swallowed, "found the body, as I told you before."
"So was it your impression that this was the first time she'd noticed there was anything wrong?"
"I suppose so, yes."
Bryony paused and rearranged her notes. "Dr. Gleeson, you mentioned earlier on that there are preserved stick insects in a room you referred to as the family museum."
"What about them?"
"We found a live one upstairs, in the room facing Sylvie's bedroom. A giant specimen."
"Yes, well, actually, there are a few of those still around. I've found about 3 in the last couple of years. They're probably breeding discreetly somewhere."
"That room, is it ever used?"
He shook his head and yawned, a gesture that Bryony found acutely irritating under the circumstances. She stepped up the pace of the questioning.
"I need to ask you for some more details of your movements last night. You told us you returned to the house at about 10 o'clock. Is that right?"
"More or less."
"Be as accurate as you can, please."
"That's it, about 10.
"And did you notice anything amiss?"
"Nope. Came in the front door, went straight upstairs, brushed my teeth and all that, went to bed."
"Had you been drinking?"
"I went to a college dinner. Of course I'd been bloody drinking."
"And when did you last see Sylvie alive?"
Yesterday morning. I came down for a cup of coffee and she was pouring cereal for the boys."
"How did she seem?"
"Oh, much as usual. I didn't really notice."
"Did you talk to her?"
"Nope. Had to get back to my work."
"Did you talk to her much in the normal course of events?"
"What about? What on earth would I have to talk to her about?"
Bryony noticed that a red blotch had broken out against the pallid skin on the side of his neck and jaw. Was he holding something back? Was there something between him and Sylvie? Had he been sleeping with her, perhaps? That would be a classic scenario. But Bryony had a hunch there was something very different going on here. She took the stone out in its exhibit bag and placed it on the table in front of him. "Dr. Gleeson, Sylvie was holding this in her hand when she was killed. Have you ever seen it before?" He leaned forward and stared at it.
"No? What is it?"
"That's what we're trying to find out. It was in Sylvie's possession."
"Not the kind of plaything I'd associate with her. I should take it to the Pitt Rivers if I were you. Someone there might be able to place it. The Pitt Rivers is full of that kind of junk."
"Why do you call it junk?"
"Bits of carving and pottery, folkloric stuff. They have drawers full of it. It's not my area. I'm a philosopher."
"What's your book about?"
"Do you want the long answer or the short one?" "It's about the idea of moral responsibility."
"Sounds interesting."
"Oh, does it really? Let me know if you'd like to borrow the typescript. Could make good bedtime reading along with your case notes."
Bryony wondered how an interest in moral responsibility went with the relentless sarcasm. It was going to be hard to get past this. She glanced at Canning, who caught her eye and picked up the cue.
"Funny thing, sir," he said pleasantly. "One of our dogs, pinched a chocolate the other night, right off the kitchen table. And the look of guilt on his face. Well, you'd have to see it to believe it. I've often wondered if a dog has some kind of sense of moral responsibility.
Blow me down, Sergeant. That,
Gleeson emphasised the word with 2 swift taps of an index finger on the table,
is a genuine philosopher's question. The kind of question my bloody students never manage to come up with.
Canning followed on, without missing a beat.
Now, your dog. Toffee is her name, I think. Is that right, sir? It's what the boys decided to call her. Bit infantile. They were only 4 when we got her, but the name seems to have stuck. I was watching Toffee in the garden this morning. A dog could react in all sorts of different ways to something like what she'd seen. She was running about with her head down, shaking it from side to side. Now that could be interpreted as some kind of embarrassment. After all, it's a dog's job to protect the people in the house.
Gleeson's expression softened for the first time.
No use blaming the poor bloody dog. She's not very bright, poor thing. Breeder's reject. Her mother got off with a stray red setter, but anyway, she might not have heard anything. She sleeps right up at the back there in the shed, as I told you.
Did Sylvie get on well with the dog? Asked Bryony.
Yes, in a fussy, girly sort of way. Gave her too many biscuits, which reminds me, the ginger biscuits were on the table in the kitchen when I came down this morning. You asked me to mention anything out of place. Of course, as you would have noticed with your professionally trained eye, Inspector, nothing's in its place in the kitchen. But my wife is very strict about putting the biscuits away, because the boys just polish them off. They've been known to eat their way through a whole packet in a few minutes.
So should we assume, said Bryony with a flicker of enthusiasm she was just too late in repressing, that Sylvie put them there after the boys had gone to bed on Friday night?
Elementary, my dear Watson.
The sarcasm was back with a vengeance.
Was she eating them herself, or giving them to the dog? And if the latter, how come the dog wasn't around when the attack occurred? A nice little conundrum for you to sharpen your wits on, Inspector.
Bryony had had enough. Dr. Gleeson, I'm investigating the murder of a young girl who was living in your house under your care. I am not here to provide you with opportunities for playing games in response to my questions. I want you to answer them, and to answer them plainly and sensibly. If I have good reason to think you're not attempting to do that, I'll charge you with obstructing our inquiries. We'll take a 10-minute break. Gleeson slumped back in his seat and fixed her with a hard stare as she went out. She found Elsingham in the kitchen, about to lay into a jam sandwich that he had cut into neat quarters. He offered the plate to her.
Don't suppose you've eaten all day either, Inspector?
She made a stop sign with her palm. Not right now, thanks. I'm in the middle of something. But while we're on the subject of food, nip round to Alcuin Close and tell the scene of crime officers to check out the pack of ginger biscuits in the kitchen. Elsingham snorted.
You serious?
Check anything out of place, that's the rule. Have you managed to get in touch with our métiers?
Sort of. Offices in Staverton Road, just 5 minutes away. They're closed on weekends, but I got onto someone at the council who gave me a home number for the branch manager, Elise Pelletier. Phoned her up. The long and the short of it is, Inspector, she knows nothing about any expedition this weekend. Nothing to do with her organisation, were her words. Last tour they did was in May, to Bath and around the south of Wales. Next one is set for 3 weeks' time to Canterbury. They don't do tours in the summer months because a lot of the girls go home to France for holidays, and they never set off at night, always 10 on a Saturday morning, returning Monday lunchtime.
Right, said Bryony. That settles that, then. Have you checked with the telephone exchange about tracing the phone call Sylvie made?
No chance, I'm afraid. Their system has no way of retaining information about the source of local calls. If it was an STD, we'd have some hope.
Elsingham tore at his sandwich with a set of teeth better suited to T-bone steaks. Well, it's crucial. She made the call, she went out, she came back. Obvious inference would be she called someone and went to visit them. She did that instead of going off on this hiking trip she was preparing for. Possibly she brought someone back to the house with her. So who did she phone? If we can get that connection, we get a major lead. Just keep working on it, will you?
But how?
I don't know. Use your wits, Elsingham. That's all any of us has to go by sometimes. Canning sidled into the room.
Could I have a quick word, Inspector?
She led the way to the booth he'd identified as her office and shut the door. "You said these things are soundproof." "It's what they told me," he said. "I haven't had them tested." Bryony took a deep breath. "Better keep the lid on then, hadn't I? Did you know there was no expedition with Amitiés this weekend, and they never set an evening departure for any of their trips?" "I suspected as much." "So did I. You'd think those... You know, it's just incredible to me that those people she works for didn't have the basic bloody common sense to ask any questions about where she was off to. Talk about moral responsibility." There was an awkward silence. Canning looked down at his shoes and did a little conventional policeman's rock, heel to toe. That's the thing, Inspector. I don't think it will help matters if you get too irate with our friend in there. He's an awkward customer, I grant you, but I don't think he's exactly obstructing our inquiries, not as such, if you get my meaning." "You think I went over the top?" "He's asking for a solicitor. Might not be the most helpful thing at this stage of the proceedings." She took a deep breath. "Okay, let's try some sweet talk." "Good idea, Inspector. And then I'll sweat him." Coming back into the adjacent room, she met Gleason's angry stare with a broad smile. He was drinking tea from a large pottery mug. "Would you like anything to eat, Dr. Gleason?" she asked. "Did you have any lunch? My colleague D.C. Elsingham has a nice line in jam sandwiches, or I'm sure we could rustle up something more substantial. You must be hungry by now." "Not remotely." "All right. I know this has been a hard day for you. I thought a little break might help. It's also enabled me to check on where we've got to with some of our inquiry lines, and it appears that there was no expedition organised for this weekend by Amitiés. So have you any idea where Sylvie might have been going, or who with?" His eyes dropped to the ground. "Not the faintest." "You're sure there are no names you might have heard her mention? Of friends, places she would like to go, plans she had?" "Nope." The answer was too clipped and too quick. "Just take a minute to think about it, Dr. Gleason." There was silence, and Canning came to the rescue. "This isn't such a big town, Dr. Gleason, and I imagine you're someone who gets out and about quite a bit. Did you ever spot her in town with friends?" A frown crossed his face. "Last week. I was in the corn market getting school stationery for the boys. She came out of Smith's as I went in. She was with 2 other girls. One of them had long red hair, pale face, pre-Raphaelite looking, very striking. The other I don't really remember." "Did they look like students?" "Possibly." Bryony leant forward and spoke with quiet deliberation. "It's our job, Dr. Gleason, to narrow down possibilities. Is there anything else you can remember about those 2 young women?" He shook his head, sat back in his seat again and stared out through the glass panel. Bryony let the silence do its work and noticed that the blotch had made a fierce return to the side of his face. After a moment he added, "The other one. Skinny, spiky type. Looked as if she cut her hair with a knife and fork." "Thank you," she said. "Now, can we just run through again your movements yesterday evening? You say you got home at about 10, after attending the college dinner?" He nodded. "And you went straight to bed?" "Pretty much, as I recall." "What time did you go out?" He screwed up his eyes in mock concentration. "Oh, hard one, somewhere between 4 and 5. Had to get a book from Blackwell's before they closed. I'm sure they'll verify that for you, Inspector, if you're looking for substantiating evidence. I put it on my account, which you'll no doubt discover hasn't been paid for 3 months." He met her eye. "There's no end to the fascinating details of my life." Maintaining eye contact and the steady, coaxing tone in her voice, Bryony, too, frowned in mock concentration. "Perhaps, Dr. Gleason," she said, "you can help me with another of those little puzzles. What was the word you used just now?" "Conundrum." "Thank you. Yes. Another little conundrum that's exercising my mind is, you say you got home at 10, but the college porter says you left at 11:15. On both accounts, you'd had quite a bit to drink. Yet you were up with the lark, ready to work on your book. How does this add up, I wonder?" Gleeson didn't bat an eyelid as he drawled a response. "I don't really know what time I left, because I was pissed and had no reason to notice. As for getting up in the morning, it's called discipline. How do you think I got myself a double first? How do you think I've written a D.Phil and 2 books since then? They don't give out Oxford fellowships in raffles, you know. And come to think of it," the strained features lit up with mock inspiration, "even with your powers of deduction, Inspector, it would surely have occurred to you that if I'd been wanting to cover up any involvement in this bizarre incident, I would have claimed to be home later rather than earlier."
"Later than what?" she asked. "Are you suggesting that you may be able to help us establish the time of the murder?" Chapter 6. Sunday, 21st September, 1974. A briefing at 9 on Sunday morning, which Elsingham breezily referred to as morning prayers, served to draw together the lines of inquiry so far. Bryony had figured out a couple of points to lead off with. There was no expedition with our métiers this weekend, but Sylvia was planning to go somewhere and leaving pretty late, which narrows the options a bit if she was taking public transport. We need to check the train and coach timetables. The next priority is this counsellor. Sylvie received most of her wages in board and lodging, so she got only £6.50 cash in hand. Hardly enough to pay a psychologist's bill. She wasn't entitled to national health benefits, and the Gleesons weren't paying, so that leaves her with the charity end of the business, volunteer counsellors, or professionals who do some work for churches or welfare organisations, the kind of people who make themselves available on a Sunday. We need to get to all of those who are on call today and ask them whether they know who might take the case of a lonely teenager short on pocket money. Sergeant Canning, can you organise the follow-up on those 2 areas? And Colin Gleeson is playing some odd games with us. I want him watched closely. We need more information about him. We have to talk to his friends, colleagues. The phone rang.
"For you," said Canning. "It's Superintendent Foster."
She took the receiver.
"Inspector Williams, is everything under control?"
"Yes, sir, of course."
"Good, because I need Canning back."
"But that's impossible. I mean, he's absolutely essential here."
"All right, then. I'll do you a deal. You keep Canning and send back the 2 extra men I brought you yesterday. It's bedlam up this neck of the woods. We had to make a dozen arrests at the football ground last night, and the lads have just brought in 2 more for a cooling-off session."
"But this is a murder inquiry."
"Don't I know it? You've got all my best people sitting around in a mansion in North Oxford arguing about fingerprints. Send those lads back in a car pronto."
Bryony put the receiver down with great care, as if it were a dangerous object, and swept her hair back from her forehead before turning to face the others in the room. "You're on your own with those inquiries," she said to Canning. Elsingham had been in touch with the police in La Rochelle and brought the news that Sylvie's parents were on their way over, expected in Oxford early evening. "Then they probably haven't left yet," said Bryony. "Get in contact straight away and ask them to bring any letters she wrote. That should tell us something about her friends. Ask them to come in for a short interview tomorrow morning." Elsingham gave a thumbs up.
"One other thing to report," he said. "Alibi for the maths tutor, Leonard Croydon. Said he drove up to Wheatley for dinner with friends at 8. It checks out."
So far so good, thought Bryony. But was it progress? Not yet. And the clock was ticking. First 72 hours was the make-or-break phase. 27 of them were gone, and she needed Pavan's report to keep the leads running. She remembered his words, "I've never seen anything like this." He'd repeated them at the start of the autopsy last night. Well, she'd seen some pretty bizarre cases herself, but the elements of this one just didn't add up. There was a complete mismatch between the type of victim and the nature of the attack. And what had it to do with the circumstances of Sylvie's interrupted departure plans? Pavan made his appearance looking supremely self-possessed as usual, with a sheaf of photographs that were pinned up behind him as he talked. The estimated time of death was 9:30 to 11 p.m, and the cause was, as he had conjectured, a single crushing blow to the back of the head with a heavy object, but probably not a hammer. The head of a hammer tended to make circular wounds, but here the whole back of the skull was caved in.
He ran his wooden pointer across a series of photographs from the autopsy. Stomach contents were negligible, suggesting that the victim had not eaten all day. This could be an indication that she was in a state of some anxiety. There were no signs of struggle, and the position of the body indicated that she had been caught unawares on her way into the room. "It was an act of extreme but controlled violence," said Pavan. "There was no other interference with the body, which means that we are unlikely to find fiber traces from the assailant's clothing. The victim's fingerprints were on the door handle, the most recent set, I would say. We've been working on some footprints made by rubber-soled shoes, which leave an impression on polished wooden flooring. The pattern of the sole does not match any of the shoes we found in the house, and indicates a size 12 shoe, which is outside the range stocked by most shops." Pavan stayed back after the briefing session to discuss some of the more technical details from the autopsy, but stressed that there was not much to go on from the point of view of evidence. "What about the stone?" Bryony asked. He took it out of his pocket, in its exhibit bag. "Here. I thought you would need it for further inquiries. On a preliminary assessment by a geologist friend of mine, the outer layer is chalk, but there is probably a core of flint. The surface is quite weathered, and there is a patina of ingrained dirt. Malcolm Nash at the Pitt Rivers Museum should be able to tell you more." "This isn't exactly a logical suggestion, but if she was hit with a rock, could it have been the same kind of rock as this?" Pavan smiled. "Associative reasoning. We're doing some tests on the victim's hair for traces of chalk. I rather favour the view that it was a stone of some kind, probably with a jagged edge, which could have caused the major vertical fracture from which the other breaks radiate." He picked up his briefcase and snapped the catch. "I'm sorry, Bryony. I doubt there is a great deal else I can usefully tell you at this stage." "But you can't just leave me in the lurch." The words spilt out in a rush, embarrassing her with their brashness. Pavan was the only person who could really be an equal collaborator in solving the case, and she'd somehow assumed he'd be around to help nut out the issues stage by stage. "By all means, get in touch if you have any questions. I'll do a couple of hours more work in the house, but then I'm afraid other matters call." "It's too early for you to put this on the back burner, Pavan. We've got nowhere yet." "On the contrary, I think we're well in command of the available evidence." His cool was too much to take. "But we don't know what we're looking for. I mean, we haven't a clue. Not a bloody clue in human terms." She gestured towards the photographs of Sylvie's head. "What possible motive could anyone have for that?" "Motive isn't my department, Bryony. Why don't you consult a police psychologist? They're the new experts in that line of conjecture." Now Bryony was stopped in her tracks. Oh no, Steve Latham. Absolutely not. "Have I said something to offend you?" Pavan looked quite concerned. "No, sorry. It's my fault for blowing a gasket. There's a former colleague of mine who's been doing some training in criminal psychology. He's not someone I find it easy to work with. Anyway, I appreciate the suggestion, and I'll think about it." He seemed to be hesitating. "If you would like me to help with some informal speculation, off the record, I'll probably be having something to eat in the King's Arms at about 7. I imagine your fridge at home is as empty as mine is. Perhaps you would like to join me." The Pitt Rivers Museum was like a cross between a cathedral and a mausoleum. Daylight filtered through a glass ceiling over vast Gothic arches, underneath which stood an assortment of giant skeletons. 2 dinosaurs commanded the space in the centre aisle. An iguanodon, flanked by a tyrannosaurus on the march, rearing almost 20 feet up in the air, its jaws ready to snatch. Other ancient dead creatures occupied the glass cases on either side of them. Smashing someone's skull would have been an unremarkable gesture in the world to which these belonged. Bryony knocked on a wooden door set into the sandstone wall on the right. After an uncomfortably long interval, a gawky young man with spectacles and a buck-toothed smile appeared. He looked very much as if he was part of the collection. "Dr. Nash," said Bryony. "Thank you for arranging to be here specially." He gave a breathy laugh.
Oh, I didn't. I'm here every day, though I don't usually make appointments on Sundays, if I can help it. Come in. He showed her into a spacious, well-lit office with bookcases in arched recesses and a work table in the centre. Now, you've brought something for an opinion? Bryony took the stone from its bag and placed it on the table. Still smiling, an expression of concentration, she realised, rather than anything social, Dr. Nash took off his spectacles and peered at the stone through a magnifying glass, then through the spectacles, then through the glass again. Words are a bit of a blur, aren't they? Where was it found? We don't know. It's one of the things we're trying to ascertain. Chalk, he said. Though it's very likely chalk-encrusted flint. That's correct. Well, it's old chalk, I'd say. Highly compacted. Very tough. Could you crush someone's skull with a piece of this? A large piece? A rock composed of chalk and flint? Yes. The flint would provide a lethal edge. Here we've seen examples of most things that can be done to the human skull with primitive weapons. I've certainly come across cases of skulls cracked with a flint axe, but it's quite possible that a lump of flint rock could do the job with a strong enough arm behind it. There are chalk downlands running most of the way across the South Midlands. So that should give you plenty of scope for your search. Go and look at a ploughed field. Socking great lumps of the stuff get thrown up by the tractor. They have to use a rock spike to break them up. You seem to know a lot about it. We helped to devise the thing. We get called in to solve all kinds of problems, you know, though I must admit this is my first murder inquiry. Bryony sensed the need to keep him focused. I'm told you would be the person to help identify the design here. Well, depends what you mean by identify. Compared with the age of the stone, the carving itself is not all that old. Couple of 100 years, I'd say. 300 at most. The thing would have no special value, other than as folkloric curiosity. Most of these things are to guard against the evil eye, but whoever did this has made a pretty good impression of one with his knife. He changed the lens on his magnifier and removed his glasses again. I see nothing, really, to help us identify where it's from. I'm pretty sure it's a talisman, but I haven't seen one like it. Folkloric talismans come and go throughout history. You get concentrations of them during the witch crazes, or whenever something provoked a community into fearing diabolic visitations. But you say you've never seen one like this? Well, no, but that doesn't mean much. Some talismans are conventional. Wax effigies, skewered hearts, petrified toads, shrunken heads, and so on. This is not a conventional design. It's someone's invention. Could be just a one-off, but one-offs are not in themselves uncommon. It would help if we could make out these words. The letters have blurred into each other as the surface has worn away. Could I take some photographs? I'd like to consult a colleague who specialises in inscriptions. By all means. It'll take me 10 or 15 minutes to get the camera set up. Why don't you have a look around in the folklore collection upstairs? You'll find some interesting pieces in the drawers under the display cabinets. Bryony climbed the steps to the gallery, which ran around the edges of the building and left the centre open to accommodate the height of the dinosaurs. The shrunken heads were immediately visible in a glass case to her right, their faces reduced to grotesque leather masks, and their hair still attached, in black matted coils, decorated with coloured threads and feathers. Their lips were sewn together with twine, the ends of which hung like mock beards dangling below the chin. They were vile things, reminders of what always nagged at Bryony about the appearance of murder victims. While they became objects of horror that everyone shied away from, their killers often walked about the world with smiles on their faces, charming anyone they encountered. A couple of sections further along, she found a magic and witchcraft case. A cauldron and a broomstick evoked the pantomime witches of Bryony's childhood, but she followed Nash's advice to look in the drawers underneath, opening one labelled Charms to Avert the Evil Eye. In it was a row of necklaces and braids entwined with small cowrie shells and a set of silver pendants crafted as tree branches, with emblems of the sun and moon growing like fruit. In the next drawer, a desiccated sheep's heart bound up with wire lay beside a small wooden box that contained hair and nail clippings, upon which to fix a curse against an enemy.
explained the tiny black letters on the card next to it. Then there were the poppets, wax effigies supposed to represent an enemy and skewered with pins. Most of them were lumpy, misshapen things that would fit in the palm of your hand and were hardly recognizable as human figures, but her eye was drawn to one of them lodged in a nest of what looked like bandages. This was perfectly formed like a baby, lying on its back, with plump arms and legs raised in the air, showing all its fingers and toes. It was blindfolded with a strip of black cloth, and into its navel had been thrust a jagged shard of glass. She shut them away again. Enough. Nash was in his office, packing up the camera and looking pleased with himself.
I should have the prints by Tuesday morning, he said.
Bryony stared at the stone on the table and saw it for the first time in relation to the collection she'd just been examining. It's the kind of object that could get a teenage girl pretty spooked then, if she'd any idea what it was.
Oh, absolutely. And it's worth considering that it may not have been something to ward off the evil eye, but rather something to invoke it. Nasty little piece, really. Make sure you donate it to the collection when you finish with it, won't you?
Bryony wondered whether Dr. Nash ever stopped grinning. Chapter 7. She spent the rest of the day working with Canning, who had got the patrol staff helping with house-to-house inquiries and made out an efficient plan of action for the 2 constables they still had with them. At 6, she called a halt. "Sergeant Canning, doesn't your family complain when you do 24-hour shifts?" He smiled and scratched the side of his head self-consciously.
"Well, my daughters give me a hard time occasionally now they're in their teens. They seem to think anybody over 40 should be drifting gently into retirement."
"You should be thinking about promotion more like. You're good at this. Why don't you move into the CID?
"Oh, I did a few years as a detective constable, but it's not my line, really. I love the patrol work. I don't have ambitions to go any further up the tree, especially if it means sitting behind a desk most of the time."
Well, you've got a point there. This was a dilemma Bryony had considered herself. But it's not all like that. What if I ask for you to be transferred back to CID for this inquiry? I need to draw on your skills, especially for interviews.
"Oh, I'd be prepared to give it a go, if the boss is in favour."
"I'll speak to Foster about it, see if we can cut a bit of the red tape with HQ. Anyway, go home and take your dogs for a walk while there's still some daylight." Left to herself in the building, Bryony wandered into the large and very dated bathroom and looked in the mirror. What was it Elsingham said? Pavan's one for the glamour girls? Well, there wasn't much point in trying to measure up. And why was she even thinking like that? Was it true that she fancied him? No, definitely not. He was one of those men it was just nice to be around. If he was a heartbreaker in his private life, that was none of her business. She put on some lipstick and eyeshadow and dragged the comb through her hair. Her hair drove her nuts. It looked nice when it had been washed, but after a couple of days it turned into a stringy mess, especially if she let it get really long. The Joni Mitchell look was all very well for rock singers, but she had to admit that it just wasn't working for her. "Never mind," she said to herself, making a face. "You'll have to do for now." The evenings were closing in faster. She loved the long twilights of summer, and always felt a sense of loss at the point where they seemed well and truly over. As she walked out into the Woodstock Road, there was a rose-coloured light across the horizon to the west, and the sky above had an eerie moonstone glow. Against it, the North Oxford mansions were great turreted shadows, some of them now lit up to reveal segments of graciously appointed interiors. They looked solid and authoritative, not the kind of places that expected intruders or sudden shocks of any kind. She crossed the road into St. Giles, which only a couple of weeks ago had been bursting with noisy activity during the annual fair and now was almost deserted. A couple of cyclists shot past her, heads down, pedalling fast, and a tramp sat on the steps of the Martyrs' Memorial, surrounded by shopping bags filled with rubbish. Bryony didn't belong here, but who did? It was a city full of people who were passing through. Students, au pair girls, fairground merchants. When she arrived at the King's Arms, it was already filling up. Here the distinct social sectors of the town converged. There was the hospital crowd, nurses and doctors who worked at the Radcliffe Infirmary, staff from the Bodleian Library and the bookshops, the students who, during term time, monopolised the lounge area and pitched their voices so that everyone in the place could have the benefit of their pronouncements, and the Oxford nomads. These were the lone individuals of different ages who hung around the cafes and pubs most of the day and most of the night. They were a curious mix. Some of them were dropouts from the competitive world of the university. Some were literary celebrities who enjoyed being alone in a crowd. Others were just people in transition, who hadn't quite found their path in life yet. Gareth was one of these, hanging around the edges of the journalism scene, as he said, doing occasional freelance work. He'd introduced himself a few weeks ago over the big shared lunch table in the lounge bar because, he said, he'd heard the Welshwoman in her when she was ordering her meal. Gareth evidently had quite a bit of the Welshman in him, and spoke with a very pleasant, quiet lilt that suited his throwaway sense of humour. They'd had quite a long conversation. Since then he'd taken to coming up every time he saw her, keen to talk on a range of topics, such as the Magdalen College swans, the formula for engine oil, and the derivation of the word weird. Having decided that what Bryony did was in fact weird, he diverted his curiosity away from the particulars with a tact that she appreciated. He spotted her as she came out from the throng around the bar and saluted her with an almost empty beer glass. She waved hello, taking her half-pint of lager to a small table in the corner, and opening her notebook as a hint that she was not looking for a chat right now. After reviewing the day's progress and pulling together some thoughts for the next briefing session, she began to study the sketch she had made of Sylvie's stone, turning it round to follow the spiral design of the illegible inscription. "You'll make yourself dizzy," said Gareth, using a trip to the toilets as an excuse for veering in her direction. "Wait there till I come back, will you? I've got something to show you." When he returned, he sat opposite her, placing a small square of folded newspaper on the table. "What do you think about that, then?" The quiet Welsh voice made the question sound pleasantly intimate. She put down her glass and unfolded the paper. It was a clipping with a photograph of elaborate spirals ploughed into a field. The story beside it occupied 3 short paragraphs of a sentence each and bore the heading, "Close Encounters on the Farm." "Is this from the News of the World?" she asked. "Sunday Telegraph." "Are you asking me if I believe in extraterrestrial ploughmen?" "Course not. But you're a detective. I'm asking you how you'd explain it." She took a gulp from her glass and peered more closely at the blurred photo. "People fake evidence of all sorts of things all the time. It's fancy stuff, I grant you, but it looks pretty harmless." "Haven't you heard of crop circles before?" "No. I don't have time to read popular fiction in the Sunday papers." "What if it isn't fiction? There's John Lennon swearing he's seen a UFO. What if there is some kind of strange agency at work?" "It's an interesting question." "Maybe," she said, "but I'll take a £5 bet it's human. Excuse me, there's someone I'm supposed to meet. He's just come in." "New boyfriend, is it?" "Say no more. I'll make myself scarce." Pavan seemed rather subdued, and ate his way through a large piece of battered fish with what seemed to Bryony unnecessary concentration. "You don't have to dissect it," she said. "Its anatomy probably got pulverized on the way to the deep freeze." He put down his knife and fork. "Habit, I'm afraid. I really can't get used to the way the English treat fish. Or peas." "You're a snob, Pavan. That's what Foster thinks, anyway." The smile was back now, and lit up his eyes in a way Bryony couldn't help responding to. She added, "But Foster thinks everyone's a snob, including me, of course." "You don't plead guilty?" "Only when it comes to police procedures. Look at the way I eat," she said, loading mash and baked beans onto the back of her last piece of sausage. "Anyway, let's get this stuff out of the way. I'm going to take the plates back and get you another glass of wine while you prepare to have your brains picked." She came back to find him reading the newspaper cutting about crop circles. "Where did you get that from?" she asked. "It was on the floor behind my chair. Gareth must have dropped it. He's one of the regulars here. Always got some burning issue he has to consult me about." "And what was your opinion on this?" "A fake, of course." "So who could have done it? It's quite sophisticated." "Not like our case," Bryony huffed. "I went to the Pitt Rivers this afternoon, and it just occurred to me, walking through that place with the dinosaurs and dodos and everything, that there's something primordial about this murder. There's this young woman, hardly more than a child, suddenly and unaccountably clubbed to death. People think murder inquiries are about who done it. But with the most difficult cases, the question is not who done it, but why. Where on earth do we look for a motive?" Pavan's smile vanished. "I can see what you mean. But if there is no motive as such, there may still be motivation. If you take the example of, say, Ian Brady, the motivation is sexual and sadistic. There are no indications of that kind of impulse in our killer. However, there is the possibility that he was interrupted." "By Gleason? That did occur to me. Gleason's being very odd about the time of his return to the house. So supposing the killer was interrupted, maybe he hadn't finished whatever it was he meant to do. But what if there is a motive, Pavan? What if Sylvie Beck was mixed up in something that got her into dangerous company? The stone might be our main clue. I went to see your friend Nash at the Pitt Rivers, and he thinks it could be a talisman of some kind. I looked at some of their talismans, and they're vile. What if we're dealing with a person who believes in that stuff?" Pavan flicked his hand at the clipping. "Well, lots of people still believe in supernatural powers. I wouldn't care to comment on the relevance of the talisman, but what I can say is that I collected some test results on my way out. There are traces of chalk in the victim's hair, which could mean that she was killed with a stone of the same composition as the one she had in her hand." "Which could mean there was a superstitious element to this," Bryony cut in. "I think you're drawing a long bow," he said. "But I hope you will be careful. This is a case that troubles me more than most." Chapter 8. Monday, 22nd of September, 1974. When Bryony arrived in the incident room just before 8 on Monday morning, Canning was already there.
"Out of luck with the coaches," he said. "All the tickets booked from Oxford on Friday evening were checked off, so either she took the train, or it must have been a private vehicle."
"No girl in her senses would try to hitchhike alone at night," said Bryony, remembering, even as she said it, that she had done exactly that a few times, when she was too young to know better and had a head full of Bob Dylan songs.
"So what if someone was going to pick her up?" Canning was thinking aloud. "Newspaper appeal would be the best way to find that out."
"Suppose so." Bryony bit her lip. "Is D.C. Elsingham in yet?"
"Not yet, Inspector. But Superintendent Foster would like a word with you. He phoned in a few minutes ago and asked for you to ring him back."
Bryony hadn't quite got Superintendent Foster's measure. The Macho Hooligan Control Act was a bit of a cover, she knew, for a shrewd approach to police management with one of the best crime clear-up rates in the country. But it really was looking as if he didn't understand the needs of a complex murder inquiry.
"Bryony, have you seen the papers this morning?"
"No, but if there's anything in there, I have to say that I gave clear instructions there were to be no press briefings at this stage."
"Why ever not?"
"Because we don't want this case sensationalised, sir. It could provoke the sort of public interest we don't have the resources to deal with. The hoaxers and meddlers will all be on the phone."
"Part of the job, Bryony. You can't get to the genuine witnesses without sorting through the hoaxes and the meddlers. This isn't Scotland Yard, you know. You can't afford to fish quite as selectively as you're used to."
"I wasn't at Scotland Yard, sir. I was at Vine Street. I'm following procedures I learned there with a very experienced team."
"That's all very well. Here you need to take the advice of the people who know the area.
OK, she thought. Here comes confrontation. I hope you don't expect me to take the advice of a DC who has never been on a murder investigation before.
I expect you to take my advice. Get it in the papers. You can have the constables back if you need them. Now that we're over the weekend skirmishes, and you can have DC Westcott as well to man the phones. She's a woman, a bit too earnest, but very thorough.
Yes, sir. But some of these leads are complicated, and I need more help with the interviews than Elsingham's able to give me. I'd like to put in a request for Sergeant Canning to be transferred to CID duties for this case. He's got background as a DC from a few years back, he tells me, and I think he's good at this sort of work.
Canning's the type who's good at any sort of work. Why should I change his duties when he's performing them in an exemplary fashion?
A bout of smoker's cough exploded down the line, giving her a few seconds to organise her speech. As I say, sir, this case is looking like it may be complicated. It's got a twist in it that gives us a whole pack of leads to follow up. Sylvia was about to take a trip somewhere. We need to know where and who with.
Why? I don't want this inquiry going off at a tangent, Bryony. There's a set of footprints mentioned in Pavan's report. Now they've found a couple more of them in the kitchen.
In the kitchen? So the assailant might have gone into the kitchen?
That's the kind of lead you have to pursue. Now get on with it.
Elsingham appeared right on cue, just as she put down the phone. Get on to the Oxford Mail, she said to him. Give them the photo of Sylvie and tell them we need to know where she was going last weekend.
Roger, will do. Anything else you want me to follow up on? I've arranged to collect Sylvie's parents at 9:30.
Footprints. Pavan's found some that don't belong in the family. Check whether they're Leonard Croydon's. The interview with Monsieur and Madame Beck was painful and not very informative. They sat, red-eyed and drawn, responding to her questions with expressions of incomprehension that at first she interpreted as difficulty with the language, but as she became slower and more repetitive in what she was asking, they only looked more puzzled. Eventually, Monsieur Beck made it clear, politely but decisively, that they had had enough. All I can say is that the person you are describing does not sound like our daughter. Since we have identified the body just this morning, we know that it is, most definitely, our daughter. So, either there is a wrong interpretation, or there has been something in her life that has changed her up in nature. This neurotic person I don't recognize. Sylvie never had claustrophobia. There was never anything odd or compulsive in her behaviour. Bryony took out the stone and placed it in front of them. Has Sylvie ever mentioned this to you? The father shook his head. Has it got something to do with what has happened? It was in Sylvie's possession. Where did she get it from? We don't know at this stage, Monsieur Beck, how she came to get hold of it. But if you have any suggestions, did she mention particular friends and acquaintances in her letters to you? They handed her a small sheaf of letters, which she went through as soon as they'd left. The letters were not very testing, even to her O-level French. They became shorter and less frequent over the past 6 months, with only occasional references to des amis. One called Louise had persuaded her to get a new haircut, and Marianne played tennis with her on Sunday mornings. It was a portrait of a small-scale, innocent life. All teenagers concealed things from their parents, but what was hidden behind this? The obvious person to put the question to was her counsellor, but Elsingham had gone through his 8 names and drawn a blank. Still, he said with a perky smile, I've been thinking. The newspaper report should draw him out of the woodwork, whoever he is. Or she, Brian equipped. We can't wait for that. Do another search through her stuff. I got the soccos to sort most of it yesterday, so it's in label boxes. Don't mix anything up. Make sure you wear gloves and handle the pages by the edge. Go through books of any kind, exercise books from her language classes, that sort of thing. There's no diary that I could find, and the Miss Piggy books are blank, but she must surely have kept lists of phone numbers and addresses somewhere. Yes, Gov. And don't call me Gov. He was back in less than 20 minutes. What now? Asked Bryony dryly. Thought I'd got you occupied for a couple of hours at least. Found it. You sure? Has to be. Look. He handed her a folded sheet of yellow paper with a phone number circled at the bottom. The Problem Clinic. Qualified advice on self-awareness, relationships and personal difficulties. Kevin Donnelly, M.A., Oxon. 78 Kingston Road, 755031. I rang them up. Rates are £2 for half an hour or 6 40-minute sessions for £11.50. The Problem Clinic was a converted terrace house with a small reception area at the front and the other rooms arranged for consultations. "I'll talk to Donnelly on my own first," said Bryony on the way in. "Give me time to break the ice and break the news. Have a chat with the receptionist and see what you can pick up. I'll call for you when we're ready to start the interview." Kevin Donnelly looked somewhere in his early 30s, but had yet to abandon the student image. With his Indian shirt, curly brown hair and small moustache, he wouldn't have been out of place at a late Beatles concert, though his short, slightly tubby physique put him closer to Bill Oddie than George Harrison. He showed Bryony into a room at the back of the house and offered her a seat facing him across a green speckled formica table. Was this where Sylvie had sat? Some effort had been put into making the surroundings congenial. There were pots of geraniums on the window-sill, and framed prints of wild animals around the walls. She wondered if Donnelly had added these touches himself. "How long have you worked here, Dr. Donnelly?" "Mister. I'm a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. 3 years, off and on." "And you run the place?" "This year I have been. The owner went back into clinical practice and left me in charge. I've got all our licensing papers, if that's an issue." "No, it's not why I'm here. I need to talk to you about Sylvie Beck, who I understand was one of your patients." "Yeah? What's up?" "She was found dead early on Saturday morning, in the house where she's been living." Donnelly's face froze. "What happened?" "She was attacked. We're conducting a murder inquiry, Mr. Donnelly, and we're hoping you can help us with some background on the victim." Sylvie had weekly consultations, on Thursdays, and had been coming since the end of May. As Donnelly provided the information, he checked the details in an exercise book, turning the pages back and forth. Bryony noticed that his hands were not steady. "I'm sorry," she said. "This must be a bit of a shock." "Course it is. I'll get myself a glass of water if you don't mind." "Please do. And I'll need to ask my colleague, D.C. Elsingham, to join us for the interview." Donnelly came back with 2 glasses, one of which Elsingham promptly knocked over as he sat down. He then made the situation worse by insisting on cleaning it up with an abject-looking tea towel he'd found in the adjoining kitchen. Bryony waited for him to settle himself before starting. "What prompted Sylvie to come to the clinic in the first place?" "Some emotional problems. Mixed bag. She's not the first au pair girl we've had come here, I can tell you. They're away from their families, don't speak the language well, and some people in Oxford just treat them like cheap servants. It's easy for them to get pretty isolated. But then this town is full of isolated people. That's why we're here. You wouldn't believe the demand for ordinary human talk, even when it has to be paid for." There was a pause as Donnelly continued to leaf through the notebook and frown at his own handwriting. "When I first saw her, she just seemed a bit depressed. Par for the course, really. Maybe I should explain how we work here. Basically, we're counsellors. When people come to us, we sit them down and talk them through whatever's on their minds. Then, if we think they've got real psychological problems, we refer them on for clinical treatment. We've got good communication lines with the Warnford Hospital. In Sylvie Beck's case, I didn't really think the Warnford was the way to go, but she had anxiety symptoms that were getting worse over the past couple of months." "What kind of symptoms?" He looked down at his book. "I'm not sure that's the sort of thing I should discuss." "It's a murder inquiry, Mr. Donnelly. We need to discuss anything that may give us a lead." "She had nightmares. Irrational fears, with possible paranoid tendencies. fears of being locked up in the house, feelings that she was under surveillance. A lot of people who come in here tell you there's someone watching them. You know, they're walking down the high street and all the windows are staring at them. Usually it's just that they've been smoking too much pot, but sometimes it's more serious. Sylvie thought there was someone watching her, but mainly when she was in the house, and especially when she was asleep. Now, in most of the textbooks, that's paranoid. Not in the textbooks I learnt from, Bryony interjected. Donnelly looked quite awkward and kept his eyes on the notebook, as if it would give him all the answers he needed. I asked her a lot about the family she lives with, and I didn't get the picture of anyone harassing her or paying her the wrong kind of attention, he said. The Gleasons had problems of their own, I gather. I put Sylvie onto a female colleague of mine, Gail Meredith, so she could probe a bit more about Dr. Gleason's behaviour, but he seems to have erred on the side of being too distant rather than the other way about. Mostly Sylvie talked about the two boys, who sound like a couple of tearaways, giving her the slip every time she took them out. What about friends? She must have had some friends in Oxford. Not many. She knew some of the other au pairs through the organisation that brought her over. Again he looked awkward, as if he was trying to sink into the surface of the table, avoiding her eye. "Where were you on Friday night, Mr. Donnelly?" she asked on impulse. He reacted as if something had stung him. "Just, you know, at home, reading. I'm sorry if I let her down." The last words sounded genuine. "I had a patient suicide once. Occupational hazard, I suppose. But this seems worse. What happened exactly? You said she was attacked?" "It wasn't a sexual assault. She was hit with a heavy object. She had something in her hand when she was found. A stone, with an eye carved in it. She ever mentioned something like that to you?" "Yes, as a matter of fact. She said she'd picked it up somewhere out in the countryside. She was all for bringing it in to show me, but I told her to throw it away. My opinion was that it was helping to stir up the wrong sorts of imaginings. Given, you know, she was already developing fears about being watched. I'm sorry I haven't been able to help much." "It's a bit late now," thought Bryony. "It could assist us if we had your case notes," she said. "Can I take that book with me?" "Is that really necessary?"
Donnelly was blushing deeply, as if she'd asked him to hand over a collection of illicit love letters. "As I say, it might assist us. At this stage you'd be volunteering it. If you'd prefer not to, that's your prerogative. For now, anyway."
"Well, I suppose I'd better let you have it. I'm afraid you won't find it much help. They're just notes for myself, not meant to make sense to anyone else. Perhaps you could let me have it back tomorrow. It's got things in there about my other patients as well." As Bryony put his notes into her briefcase, Elsingham handed Donnelly the yellow leaflet. "I was asking your receptionist about this. She said she's never seen it before."
Donnelly inspected it, frowning.
"Neither have I. Where did you get it?" "It was found among Sylvie Beck's things. In our English exercise book, to be exact."
"That's very odd. We've never advertised in that way."
"Got secret friends, then?"
said Elsingham, with a wink. Donnelly stumbled against a chair as he moved to show them out, then held them up in the hallway for another 5 minutes, seeking reassurances about his notebook and asking questions about the murder. Bryony was trying to avoid giving more detail than she had to, and when they managed to extract themselves, they ran down the steps into the street. Elsingham accelerated too sharply as he backed the car out.
"Well, that was a disappointment," he said. "Not much to go on, have we?"
"Not much. Would you trust that bloke?"
"I thought he meant well."
"He was holding something back."
"Good thing you got his notes, then. Let's hope he writes down all the juicy stuff."
"If you can stop driving like you're on a stock car rally, I'll take a look at what we've got here." The handwriting was loopy and slanted, not easy to read on narrow lines. Donnelly had made brief notes for each patient's visits, but there was no specific detail of persons or circumstances. The comments could only be described as eccentric. She read out a few lines.
more chaotic than on the last visit. Free-flowing associations, repeated. Compression of thoughts, huge pressure, massive, can't handle it at all. Cold influences with no return energy. Peak alertness in early morning and evening, with sound and colour enhancement, but poor retention. Imprints, but doesn't mould.
"Bloke's a nutter," said Elsingham. "Is it all like that?"
"Seems to be. Thing is, do we have to start investigating the problem clinic now? Or is this just your regulation Oxford screwball? You're supposed to be the local, Elsingham. What do you reckon?"
"Search me. But I know what Foster would say."
"What?"
"Check if he wears size 12 shoes."
Bryony sent Elsingham back to Canterbury Road to copy the relevant sections of Donnelly's notes, while she prepared herself for another round with Colin Gleeson. She took Canning with her as a precaution. They found him sitting at his dining-room table with his hand around a whisky glass. He rose unsteadily, lifting the glass in the air.
"Come for a drink?"
"No, thank you, Dr. Gleeson, and I'm afraid I must ask you to hold off on your next until we've had a talk. Please sit down."
Not often a strange woman invites you to sit down in your own house. What now, then?
"Did you walk home on Friday night, Dr. Gleeson?" He nodded. "Why didn't you take a bus?"
Didn't see one.
"But number 4 buses run every quarter of an hour through the evening. At least one must have passed you."
Nope.
"You sure about that?" He narrowed his eyes with an expression of mock cunning and wagged a finger.
I know what you're getting at. The last bus runs at 10:45. So if I didn't see any, that means I must have set off home later than 10:45. Let's agree, then, that I set off whenever they say I did. Why don't you tell me what time I got home?"
She was prepared for the game and cut through it. "So you walked home, arriving, let's say, sometime after 11. Did you pass anyone in the street as you got near the house?"
How near?
"Let's say within 500 yards. He made a small, shrugging movement. "Is that a yes or a no, Dr. Gleeson? Did you see anyone as you got in sight of the house?" Gleeson put his hand around the empty glass, and Bryony could see his fingertips growing white with the pressure. "Is something the matter, Dr. Gleeson? It's a simple enough question." Still clutching the glass, he got up and went to the sideboard, where he uncapped the whisky decanter, poured out a measure and knocked it back. "Please sit down," said Bryony, in a tone of command rather than request. He was visibly trembling now, and as he raised his arm high, Canning sprang up to restrain him. But it was too late. With a single theatrical sweep, Gleeson sent the decanter and glasses flying across the room. The decanter bounced off the wall and smashed against the iron grate in the fireplace with a fearsome explosion, spraying the room with brilliant shards. Gleeson let out a cowboy whoop.
"Stuart Crystal," he proclaimed. "The rector's wedding present to me and my lovely wife. I can't tell you how often I've wanted to do that."
Canning took him by the elbows and held him in a restraining lock as Bryony rose from her chair and began to brush sharp fragments from her skirt and shoulders. She could feel them in her hair, too, and noticed, as she raised her arm, that it had a deep scratch that was starting to bleed. "Call a patrol car," she said to Canning, "and get him taken to St. Aldate's station. We'll talk to him later. If he makes a fuss, charge him."
"With what, Inspector?"
"Obstructing inquiries, assaulting police, whatever you like." While Canning was organising Gleeson's removal, she went into the back garden and combed the glass from her hair. She rinsed her arm under the outside tap, then took a walk around the garden, determined to steady herself. The reactions of an experienced police officer to sudden assault were no different from anyone else's. Shock, anger, self-pity. You just had to learn to manage them. She focused her attention on the back wall, then the fences on either side. There were 3 spots where someone might easily get over, one at the back and 2 on the fence running along the kitchen side of the house. Surely anyone leaving this way would have been noticed by Toffee the dog, who came bounding out of the shed to meet Bryony as soon as she had stepped outside. On the other hand, the dog hadn't barked, so maybe she wouldn't have barked at the intruder either. Canning appeared at the back door and called,
"You all right, Inspector?"
"Yeah, I guess so," said Bryony, heading back to the house. "How's our resident psycho? Bit of an act, don't you think?"
"You sure it is? He's got a nasty temper on him. Nastier than I would have anticipated at any rate. We'll have to get this dog taken care of, if he's likely to be detained."
"How can we detain him?"
"Prime suspect, surely, Inspector. Drunk, prone to violent outbursts, marriage on the rocks, pretty au pair girl hanging around late at night when he comes home."
"So he smashes her head in? Not likely, Canning."
"He could have done it with that decanter. Maybe he was destroying the evidence."
"We'll eliminate that possibility. Get the soccos to come back and collect what's left of the decanter. You know what I think? I think he's wasting my time, on purpose."
"Why would he do that?"
She stood staring out across the garden. "I don't know." Miles sat up and pushed the bedclothes away from him.
"I can't get to sleep," he huffed. "It's not even dark."
Daniel rolled over on his back and stuck both feet in the air to make a mountain out of the loosened blanket. They had been put to bed in the dining room, on a double mattress laid out on the floor. They could hear the noise of the television in the other room.
"Mom!"
Daniel called, drawing the word out into 2 syllables. They waited, listening as the door of the next room opened and footsteps came round to their door. Angela Gleason stood with her arms folded, looking at them.
"What is it?"
"We're hungry,"
said Daniel, bringing his legs down with a thump to emphasize the point.
"You should have eaten your tea. I'll get you some bread and butter."
"We're not hungry for bread and butter. We're hungry for ginger biscuits."
"Then you're not hungry at all. Go to sleep." Miles was pulling at the sheet, scrolling it into a ball around his hands.
"It's too early to go to sleep."
"You can read a book."
"I don't like books. I only like Superman comics. Anyway, we don't have any of our books here, remember?" "If we had bikes," said Daniel, "at least we could ride around. I want one of those rally choppers. They're faster than a speeding bullet. Why didn't we get bikes for our birthday?"
"8's too young for bikes. You can have them when you're 10. The roads are too dangerous for boys your age." Daniel kicked at the bedclothes.
"You're possessed with things being dangerous."
"The word is obsessed, Daniel," said their mother. "Now go to sleep."
"Why can't we watch television?"
Miles protested. "You promised you'd go to bed promptly if I let you watch Top of the Pops, and if you don't keep your side of the bargain, there'll be no Monty Python tomorrow night."
"All right, then," said Daniel. "We'll have to do this silly walk ourselves all around the sitting room like this."
He rolled out of bed and began staggering about as if his legs were made of rubber.
"You're impossible!"
Angela Gleason exploded, then shut the door and left them to it. They played silly walks for a few minutes, knocking into the furniture that had been pushed to one end of the room, then collapsed back onto the mattress. Miles leant on his elbows, propping his chin in his hands.
"Do you think they brought us here because the murderer's trying to get us? What if he knows where we are anyway? He could get in the window in the middle of the night."
Daniel stumbled to his feet again, went over to the window and pulled the curtains aside.
"This window's right next to the street. We could climb out if we wanted to. There's nowhere to go."
Miles got up and went to join him.
"Anyone could climb out of here. Or in." "Not really," said Daniel. "There's a lock on it to stop the burglars."
Miles examined the little bolt at the side.
"That might stop the burglars," he said, "but it wouldn't stop a murderer. A murderer would just break the window. He could come in here in the middle of the night. Dad should have caught him. Dad wasn't there. He was out. But then he came back."
Daniel turned to face his brother.
"Of course he came back. He was there in the morning." "He came back in the night." Dad came into our room. He came up to the bed to look at us, but I pretended to be asleep. Then how did you know it was Dad? Because I had my eyes a tiny bit open like this.
Miles screwed his eyes into exaggerated slits.
What if it was the murderer who came into our room? What if he was looking for us and he got Sylvie by mistake? Why would he want to get us? Because murderers like killing children best. It's the most fun for them. There are some murderers who follow you around. They follow you wherever you go, until one day they just...
Daniel pounced at Miles, who shrieked, then put his hand over his mouth to muffle a fit of giggles, while Daniel stood over him, making claws of his hands.
They jump out on you and kill you.
Chapter 9. Tuesday, 23rd September, 1974. Bryony slept little, and by 4 in the morning had given up trying. Lying there with her eyes closed was like an open invitation to all the jabbering images from the day to crowd in on her. Items from the witchcraft displays at the Pitt Rivers paraded through her mind, while Donnelly's voice droned on about free-flowing associations and cold influences. The image of Gleason smashing the decanter replayed itself dozens of times. And then there was the press to worry about. What was going to be in the morning's papers? Journalists would start doing their own investigations, as they invariably did, guessing who the suspects were and picking their favourites. At 5, she got up and sat going through her notes as the daylight grew. Then she had a bath, washed and dried her hair, and put on the better of her 2 cotton trouser suits, taking a moment to check her image in the mirror before grabbing her case and opening the front door onto the silent street. The weather was still mild, so walking to work would be a refreshing experience. As she reached the roundabout at the Plain, she spotted a boy with a satchel of newspapers, pedalling over Magdalen Bridge towards her. She called out to him and bought 2 copies of the Oxford Mail. Pushing one of them into her case, she unfurled the other as she walked. It wasn't as bad as she had feared. The story had missed the front page, maybe because it was a few days old now, but Sylvie's photo appeared at the top of page 3 under the headline, "Au Pair Girl Savagely Slain in North Oxford Home." Members of the public were urged to contact the police if they'd been in the area around the junction of Woodstock Road and St Bernard's Road between 9:30 p.m. and midnight on Friday, or if they knew where Sylvie might have been going, and lastly, if they had any information that might assist in identifying the killer. Terrific. That'd bring the cranks out in force. The phones would probably be ringing all day, creating lists of useless follow-up actions. Bryony should have briefed the press herself instead of trying to disown the exercise. With another hour to spare before she could do any useful work in the incident room, she decided to stop for breakfast at Brown's in the market, always surrounded by an aroma of frying bacon at this time of the morning, and take a closer look at what was in the paper. Gareth was sitting there with an open book in front of him, a thick wedge of bacon sandwich in one hand and a pint-sized mug in the other. He nodded to Bryony and went on reading. Funny, you could forget how lonely you were until you saw another lonely person. Bryony knew almost no one in Oxford outside the police force, and Gareth was one of the few people she could talk to about anything other than casework. Maybe she should approach him for a change. She ordered scrambled eggs and took her own pint mug of coffee over to his table. "Will it disturb you if I sit here?" she asked, pulling out the chair opposite him. "Probably." He looked up from the book. "But I kind of like being disturbed, especially by someone with a copy of today's paper. Anything in it?" "See for yourself." He spun it round and studied the front page. "Can't be much news. BBC introduces Ceefax. You'd hardly think that would make the headlines, would you? Guess they've run out of sensations now that Nixon's out on his ear. You know, sometimes I think we're living in a sort of time trough." "What do you mean?" "I dunno. The 60s revolution's all washed up. And where are we going next? There's Watergate in America, and a hung Parliament here. It's as if the momentum's gone and everything's kind of strung out. There's a poem by Matthew Arnold where he says someone's wandering between two worlds. One dead, the other powerless to be born. That's kind of scary. So, do you get scared? Dealing with murders and God knows what. You'd have to get over being scared, surely. In a way, you have to learn the discipline. Focus on the procedures. But sometimes, when you're in the middle of a really bad case, you can get the feeling that you're right on the edge, you know? That everything could just fall apart. It's almost like vertigo. I have to admit there's times when I've been terrified. Not necessarily by, you know, the obvious things like looking at a murder victim, but by the feeling We just what? Gareth asked quietly. We just live in a nasty world. I don't actually believe that, not most of the time, but there's some situations that start to make you think that way. Sorry, he said. I should be looking for some light diversion, shouldn't I, while you eat your breakfast? You carry on, and I'll see what else is in here. She watched him flick through the paper, stopping only momentarily at the image of Sylvie, but opening it fully a couple of pages further on and reading for a minute. Then he folded it again. Book reviews. Why do they have to be so narky? Friend of mine's written this book about Oxford scandals. It's being slated all over the place. Poor guy's getting quite depressed about it. Oxford scandals? Maybe he stepped on a few toes. They're really old scandals, 17th and 18th century mostly. For Oxford, that's recent, I'd have thought. There was a pause while Bryony finished her eggs, and Gareth toyed with the sugar dispenser, glancing at her from time to time. Mind if I ask you a question? He said. Depends on the question. That guy you met in the pub the other night, is he your boyfriend? You looking for scandals around me? No. He looked away again. Good. I was rather hoping he wasn't. Pavan's just someone I work with. There was an awkward pause. She couldn't think what to say. Have you solved the mystery of the crop circles yet? Yeah. I met the people who did it. Group of students from around here. It's a hoax. Like you said, they knew their stuff. Couple of them are research students working on new harvesting techniques. Bryony pushed her plate to one side, picked up her giant mug, and looked at him over the rim. Hoaxes are a bit of an Oxford thing, aren't they? Course. Did anyone ever tell you about the famous police hoax a few years ago? It was before they combined the city police forces. There were two separate forces responsible for the town centre, with a demarcation line down the middle of the high street. Sounds typical. Anyway, these students rang up the lot who were responsible for the East End from Longwell Street in, and said there was a group of students dressed as police marching up the high street. Then they rang up the other lot, who patrolled from Longwell out through Mutley Plain, and told them the same thing. So these two groups of police marched from opposite ends of the street to arrest each other. Both of them laughed, then looked embarrassed. Oh, well, said Bryony. I'd better get to work. Do you ever go to the cinema? Not when I'm on a case. But you're always on a case, aren't you? Pretty much. So is that the brush-off? No, sorry. Bryony blushed deeply. I didn't mean to. I like talking to you. I thought maybe we could arrange to meet up now and again, instead of just running into each other. I can't arrange anything, really, right now. It's all a bit full on, you know? She got up to go. No, I don't know, not really. The work I do has never been exactly full on, not since my final exams, anyway. Watch yourself, Bryony, won't you? She walked through to North Oxford, replaying the conversation in her mind with all sorts of mixed feelings. Pleasure, embarrassment, disappointment. Why disappointment? Was there something she'd just missed out on? As she turned the corner into Canterbury Road, she was surprised to see two police cars already parked outside the incident room. Something had happened. There was a uniformed officer in the entrance hall, and another at the foot of the stairs by the door of the incident room, and there was Foster. The looming bulk was unmistakable behind the glass screen of the little room she'd adopted as her office.
"Morning, Williams,"
he bellowed as she came in. He was sitting at her desk, in her chair, with the morning's paper spread out in front of him. Canning stood beside the desk, looking distinctly awkward. Foster stubbed out the remains of a cigarette and leant forward, massaging the sides of his face with nicotine-stained fingers. Then he looked up at her.
"So, we've got this in the papers at last. How's your progress?"
Bryony didn't feel like elaborating. "As good as I can make it, sir, with the team we've got."
"Good as you can make it isn't good enough, Bryony. We've been flat out all over the place. Major burglary in Osley, nasty rape up at Headington Park, attack on a couple of blokes leaving the pub in Cowley with GBH. As you well know, I've got members of the CID on holiday and another one off sick. I've had to call in some help from HQ at Kidlington. So if you can't get this case sorted, I'll have to find somebody else who can."
Bryony listened in stunned silence until he'd finished, sat back in his chair, and lit another cigarette. "Stay cool," said a voice in her head. "This stuff happens all the time. It's part of the job." "There's another angle to this case, sir. Sylvie was supposed to be going somewhere on Friday night, but something made her change her mind. I have strong reasons for believing that the murder is connected in some way with this expedition, and whoever was going too." Foster interrupted, his words coming out on a stream of smoke.
"Then who was it, and where are they, Williams? Where the hell are they?"
"That's what I'm trying to find out, sir." She got up again, this time to fetch the stone, which she removed from its bag and placed on the desk. "Sylvie was found with this in her hand. I've had it analysed both forensically and for the possible meanings of its design. The stone is some kind of talisman against the evil eye. It's chalk, probably from the Vale of the White Horse area. There were traces of chalk in her hair. The murder weapon could have been a larger rock of the same composition." As she was speaking, she knew this was not coming out right. Instead of keeping eye contact with Foster, she let her gaze fall to the desk, watching the movements of his meaty hand as it stubbed out the half-finished cigarette, twisting its remains into the ashtray with unnecessary force.
"Bloody hell, Williams. This is starting to sound like an episode of The Wooden Tops. How much more of it is there?"
She rallied, drawing herself up and meeting his eye. "I'm sorry. I know I haven't explained this well. It's not easy to give a brief account. There are connections, things that point to a more complicated story. I'm asking you to put your confidence in me, sir. I'm worried that we've got a killer who might strike again. I've been working non-stop on this case, and I'm not about to let up. I'm asking you to keep me on it, and to get Sergeant Canning allocated to CID duties, so we can pursue all the relevant inquiries."
"I'm perfectly sure, Bryony, that you've had your nose to the grindstone and your shoulder to the wheel, but I don't think you know where you're going."
Foster had gone a dangerous shade of puce, and Bryony didn't fancy being the centre of a coroner's inquiry into a repeat of his heart attack. "Give me till the end of the week, sir. If I've got no more to go on by then, you can put me on Cowley break-ins for the next 6 months." Foster snorted.
"Cheek! Get me a cup of tea while I have a think. 2 sugars.
When she came back, Foster was writing on a lined notepad, his great hand curled around the front of the pen as if he were just learning how to hold it.
"Canning here says I should keep you on the case."
He wrote several lines more before stopping to look at her.
"All right, Bryony. I've written a memo here, so it's all on the record. I'll let you carry on up the Khyber for the next 4 days, but I expect you to report to me first thing each morning."
After Foster had left, Bryony sat for a few moments trying to put her thoughts back in order. Macready nearly took her off the team once, for following leads he thought were a waste of time, but that was on her first case with him. Once he'd learnt to trust her instincts, he'd been solidly behind every inquiry she'd wanted to make. She got out her notes and began going over the evidence step by step, to see what there really was to back up her instinct this time. Sylvie's expedition had been deliberately kept secret from the Gleesons. She'd pulled out of it at the last minute and returned home. She'd had a snack in the kitchen, then gone to her room, removed her boots, taken the stone from her rucksack, and gone downstairs with it in her hand. That was the moment when she was killed. "Just a minute," Bryony said out loud. Sylvie did not have any snack in the kitchen. According to the autopsy, she hadn't eaten all day. So who took out the ginger biscuits? She picked up the phone and got through to Bevan, who, as luck would have it, was at the lab. Yes, he said, some more test results on household items came through this morning. He was just going through them. There were no bloodstains on the clothing Gleeson had worn to the dinner. Bryony waited on the line for several minutes, hearing the pages move as he went through them.
Yes, here we are.
She could practically see the expression of delight on his face as he spoke.
Huntley and Palmer's ginger nuts, 6 remaining in packet, wrapper torn from top edge, etc., etc. It seems they are still trying to sort out the mess of fingerprints, but there are traces of blood on the wrapping. 2 smears, neither of which helps us with the fingerprints, but this is definitely the victim's blood.
Foster tells me there are more of those size 12 footprints in the kitchen.
Yes, and now we must examine the cupboard doors. So what have we here, Bryony? A murderer who stops to eat biscuits at the scene of the crime. That's rather cool, isn't it?
It's creepy, but it fits. Sylvie felt there was someone hanging around at all hours in the house. Someone had been using the spare room on the top floor next to her bedroom. Our killer must have felt quite at home in that house. She put the phone down and thought for a few minutes, then rang Nash at the Pitt Rivers. He had said his photographs would be ready this morning.
"Yes, they're here," he said. "I also had a set of them sent to my colleague at the Ashmolean, who specialises in inscriptions, Damon Crouch. I've just been discussing it with him. We don't have a definitive answer. These things usually involve a fair amount of guesswork, but we think we can make a pretty educated guess. If you'd care to come here, I can show you what we have to go on."
Bryony got a lift in one of the patrol cars and arrived at the Pitt Rivers barely 10 minutes later. She swept past the dinosaurs at a very 20th century pace, wondering whether Nash had adopted his bizarre grin as a tribute to his fellow inmates. When he opened his door, the grin was unchanged, but this time he was evidently in a mood to match it.
"Yes," he took sharp nasal breaths as he chuckled. "We are rather pleased with ourselves, actually."
The prints were scattered all over his office table, surrounded by lamps trained on them from various angles. He pulled back a chair for her, selected 2 of the prints, and switched the lamps off.
"Sometimes you get the best sense of these things from a general impression," he explained. "If you look at lettering too intensely, it breaks down into incoherent marks. A psychological thing, almost. A case of being able to see the wood rather than the trees. Now, the clearest word is this one. Here."
He pointed with a sharpened pencil.
"What does that look like to you?"
Bryony squinted, taking her glasses off and putting them back on. Nash chuckled again.
"You're making the mistake, see? Trying to get too close to it. Are you long or short-sighted?"
"Short."
"Thought so. Takes one to know one."
He held the photo up in front of her, just too far away to be in focus. The print had been developed as a negative, with the letters showing as blurry white shapes on a dark grey background.
"Cover your eyes with your hands. No, don't press your eyeballs, just cover them. Now, take them away and tell me whatever occurs to you."
"The last word is control," Bryony offered, more as a question than a statement.
"Good. What else?"
"First letters are Y and E."
"Yay? That's 2 out of 4. Try again. Try the second word."
H-U-S-I-E.
First letter's a B, not an H. The B would have had an extended tail on the bulb, like this."
He showed her some lines of manuscript in a large book lying open at the other end of the table.
But it's been worn away, so the word is busy."
"The busy something control," said Bryony. "So, what's the something? Starts with an F."
"Right! 5-letter word, beginning with F. Do you go to church?"
No. And if you think I'd be bothered by F-words, you don't know much about police work.
That's not the point I was trying to make.
The snorting chuckle was repeated, too close to Bryony's ear for comfort.
Got to know your hymns, see, as my friend Crouch at the Ashmolean does. Handel set this one to music, with rather a nice harp solo at the end, which Crouch once learnt to play. The lines are in the middle of the second verse. If yet his sin be not too great, the busy fiend control.
Nash was not grinning now. He was beaming, like a trickster who'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. The busy fiend control, said Bryony.
That's what we think, but it's repeated, see?
He pointed to a row of other photographs, showing the spiral letters radiating from the corner of the eye, tracing a brow line, then coiling round again to the outer edges of the stone.
When you say it several times over, it has an effect.
The busy fiend control, the busy fiend control, the busy fiend control, murmured Bryony. Yes, I see. The word control could be at the beginning or the end of the sentence. So it's a kind of circular chant or something. But what's the point of it? What would it mean?
The devil was often characterized as busy, mischievous, interfering with everything, stirring, the enemy of peace and quiet, never at rest, leading everyone a dance.
That's just what I'm afraid of, said Bryony.
Oh, come on, Nash burst out, snorting again. You don't believe in the devil, do you?
No, but I could believe that someone is leading us a dance, and that they're at work on more mischief. So far, the investigation had missed him completely. I need to know where a young girl living in Oxford might have got this, she said. Do you have any more ideas about its place of origin?
No, but you could ask at one of the museums down in the White Horse Vale, Devizes or Avebury.
Chapter 10. All the way back to Canterbury Road, Bryony was fighting off misgivings. Pavan said she was drawing a long bow. Foster had already lost patience with this line of inquiry, and no doubt Elsingham would be champing at the bit again. But Elsingham was looking quite chipper.
Something's come up, consequence of our article in the papers.
A girl's rung in, name of Hannah Jensen, got an Australian accent. She knew Sylvie. His smile broadened. And she knows where she was supposed to be going this weekend. So I told her to go to her local police station and make a statement. But I took her phone number. Bryony scribbled down the number and rang it immediately. Hannah Jensen?
Yes?
The voice on the other end was guarded. Detective Inspector Bryony Williams. I understand you made contact with the police this morning regarding the murder of Sylvie Beck.
So now what?
I'd like to talk to you. There was a brief pause before the response shot back.
Where?
Where would be convenient?
Well, this is a different tune, isn't it?
The rudeness of the tone was disconcerting. I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to, said Bryony.
They've been buggerising me about, that's what. Person I spoke to before said to go to my local station and make a statement. Well, I went into the main station at St Aldate's, and I had to wait half an hour in a queue with a bunch of deros before I could even get a statement form. Then I filled it in, and this dingbat in a uniform takes it away to an office behind the desk, and 5 minutes later he comes back and says,
"Excuse me, madam, what is this regarding?"
Yes, the voice was definitely Australian, but the last words were spoken in an accurately mimicked local accent. I'm sorry, said Bryony. The officer who took your call here this morning is new to the job, and I'm afraid he failed to refer you to the right person.
And who's that supposed to be?
Me. If you give me your address, I'll get over there as soon as I can. The address was in Jericho, a short car trip or 15 minutes walk away at most. Bryony opted for the walk, and for leaving Elsingham behind to deal with phone calls and other routine matters. Make sure you get Donnelly's case notes back to him, she said.
Will do. He's phoned up already. Wants to talk to you.
Well, he'll have to talk to you instead. If he's got anything new worth telling us, I'll get in touch with him later this afternoon. The sun faded behind clouds as she crossed Walton Street and headed into the warren of Jericho. with its narrow, treeless streets whose cramped houses sucked in the damp air from the canal. Number 27 Brent Street was on a corner, surrounded by a border of overgrown grass and a capsizing fence. A rusting orange Mini was parked outside. At least 2 voices yelled, "Come in," in response to Bryony's knock on the front door, which opened onto a narrow hallway with conspicuous signs of rising damp. A mousy-looking young man emerged from a room at the back, looked at her, retreated without any greeting, and left her standing there. She was starting to wonder if she'd been given the wrong address when a pair of thin legs in black footless tights appeared on the stairs above. "You that policewoman? I'm Hannah." The girl didn't offer to shake hands. Bryony remembered Gleason's description of one of the girls he had seen in town with Sylvie. Skinny, spiky type, looked as if she cut her hair with a knife and fork. Well, if this was her, he'd been pretty accurate. Hannah's small face was framed with jagged clumps of peroxided hair, contrasting with her dark, sharply angled eyebrows. She wore a football jersey that swam across her narrow shoulders and fell over her hands. "We don't have a sitting room," she said. "You better come up to my room." The room in question had purple walls and a bright pink ceiling, from which hung a naked light bulb and a cage with a canary in it. There was nowhere to sit. The bed was unmade, and the only chair was piled high with a mess of clothes and towels. The canary had ruffled its feathers into a downy yellow ball, and looked quite put out at the intrusion. "This your pet?" asked Bryony. "Nope, and it's not my choice of colour on the walls, in case you're wondering. I'm just here for the summer, on a short let. The regular tenant's one of those left-over hippie types, long skirts, long hair and Tweety birds." "Not your style." "No, but I kind of like the Tweety bird. Maybe I'll take him back to London with me next month. What's the penalty for stealing a canary?" "Look," said Bryony, "I don't think we can have a proper conversation here. Isn't there somewhere else we could talk? A cafe or something?" Hannah looked at her watch. "Perch will be open. Got a car?" "I'm afraid not." "Then we'll have to go in mine, which means you get to buy the drinks." "Okay, but that means the conversation is off the record. I can't do an official police interview in these circumstances, so you may have to come over to our incident room and repeat some of it." Under the football jersey there was a movement approximating a shrug. Hannah pushed her bare feet into a beat-up pair of sneakers and threw open the front door. The car was the rusting Mini, with a skull and crossbones daubed in black on the bonnet. Bryony stopped and gave it an honest, open stare. "Did you do the artwork?" "Sure. Does that make me a suspect? Door's not locked. You can get in." For someone of 5'9", this was easier said than done, because the seats had sunk almost to the level of the car floor. Before Bryony had got the door closed, Hannah started turning the key in the ignition, but the engine only half turned over and choked. At about the 5th attempt, it got going, and the car started forward with a jolt. Negotiating the sharp street corners with one hand on the wheel, Hannah leant across Bryony and started raking through the glove compartment. "What are you looking for?" Bryony cut in. "Let me find it for you. You shouldn't drive like that." "Photos, in a little plastic bag? You don't look like a cop. I suppose I shouldn't make cracks about being a suspect. Didn't mean to be callous. It's just this kind of isn't real to me, you know? This thing that's happened. I guess it's pretty horrible. Have they got the murderer yet?" "No, we haven't." "Creepy. Hope there's no one else on his hit list." Bryony found the photographs, and with some difficulty packed the mess of other things, hairspray, sunglasses, deodorant, a crumpled map, back into the glove box. "I took them on Friday," said Hannah. "Just picked them up this morning." Sorting rapidly through the first half-dozen pictures, Bryony stopped when she came to a shot of 2 girls standing in Turl Street against the Exeter College wall. Sylvie, wearing the clothes she had been found in, was a good 6 inches shorter than her companion, a beautiful girl with auburn hair who smiled brilliantly at the camera. "That's Claire," said Hannah. "Claire Belmont. Taken about 3 o'clock. We met Sylvie in town. She'd been buying stuff for the camping trip. Jed, he's the bloke she's with in the next shot, was going as well. Think he's got a crush on Claire." In a third photograph, Claire was on her own in close-up. "She likes to have lots of photos taken," she added. "Can see why, can't you?" So where were they going? The Ridgeway, near that place, where the old white horse is. They were going for the weekend, walking for 3 days and finishing up at Avebury. You weren't going. Supposed to be, but I changed my mind the day before. Claire wanted me to go. She's a bit pissed off that I didn't. But Sylvie was definitely going. Definitely. I was there when they made all the arrangements, because the original idea was that Claire was driving down with Jed, and I was taking Sylvie in my car after I collected her from St Giles outside the Lamb and Flag. That's because she didn't want those people she lives with to know about the trip. Why not? Long story. Then save it. Tell me over lunch. Why don't you just ask Claire? She should be back by now. Bryony studied the photographs again, noting details of the clothing. Claire wore an Afghan coat of the more expensive variety and flared jeans. Jed had on what looked like a professional quality green anorak. A fine-looking couple, if they were a couple. Sylvie didn't look at all as if she belonged with them. Hannah drew up in the parking area at the end of the lane. Have to walk from here. Port Meadow stretched around them, bathed in a light mist. Bryony felt a kind of exhilaration as they set off down the track by the canal. Fat ducks sat on the bank, and a couple of geese crossed in front of them, heads held high. "What a place!" she exclaimed. "You never been here before?" "No, I've heard about it." "Should have picked up Claire," said Hannah. "She loves coming here." There was a pause. She's going to be pretty churned up when she hears about Sylvie. They were close friends. No. Sylvie's quite a bit younger than the rest of us. A kid, really. But Claire was trying to help her. Guess I'll have to go round and break the news. After we've had a drink. The pub was a thatched building surrounded by gardens. They chose a window seat from among the array of empty tables, and Bryony went to get 2 halves of lager. The only other people in the lounge were 3 men who looked like maintenance workers, in overalls and black parkas. It felt colder here than it was in the centre of Oxford. In another couple of weeks, when autumn had fully taken over from the Indian summer, they'd be lighting the fire in the great stone fireplace, and the lounge would be filled with noisy undergraduates. Well before then, she wanted to have made an arrest. When you're on a murder inquiry, Macready said, think of every day as a week. Well, it was day 4 already, but Hannah was giving the most promising leads yet. "So, why did you paint the skull and crossbones on the car?" she asked, putting the drinks on the table. "Because I was a pirate boy," Hannah grinned, showing perfect teeth. "In a show." "You're an actress?" "More of a singer-dancer." "And so's Claire?" "Nah, she's more of an actress. We've just finished a run together at the Playhouse. Godspell? I was in it in London, but they made some cast changes for the touring production, so Claire got in. She's an Oxford girl. She's got a fabulous singing voice. Sounds like Marsha Hines. The show will be opening again for a London season over Christmas. I can get you a ticket if you want." She took a gulp of lager that lowered the level in the glass alarmingly. "I'll hold you to that when I've cleared up this case," said Bryony. "I used to live in London. Still do, really. I've kept my flat." "Like me. Never let go of a good rental in London. I just took a sublet here for the summer. And look what a freak palace I landed in. Anyway, Oxford's up itself. Only place anyone's had the nerve to call me a colonial. Just because I'm Australian, they expect me to talk like Bazza Mackenzie." Bryony pulled out the photographs again. "So, who's Jed?" "Friend of Claire's. I only met him a couple of days ago." Another 2 inches of lager were knocked back, and the foam slid down the sides of the almost empty glass. Hannah was a pint girl, Bryony might have guessed, but if she went on at this rate, she'd be under the table before they'd got to any of the details of the story. "If Sylvie was to be picked up in St Giles, do you know what time she was supposed to be there?" 8:15. "Sylvie wasn't killed until at least a couple of hours after that. Something made her change her mind about leaving, and we know she made a phone call early in the evening. I need to find out who she spoke to. Any ideas?" "Not the faintest. I told you I hardly knew her. I just met her with Claire a few times." "You said Claire was trying to help her." "Claire met her a couple of weeks ago, the day after St Giles's Fair. Claire was wandering around town, she told me, and Sylvie just started following her. She'd been to see Godspell the night before and got this idea that Claire was the person she had to talk to. Lots of people get that idea, but they're mostly blokes. What did she want to talk to her about? Hannah took a deep, ostentatious breath. Now you're asking. Best person to explain it to you would be Claire herself. I'll phone her up and see if she's there. While I'm gone, get me some ciggies, would you? Some what? Cigarettes? Ask if they've got Black Russians, and I'll have another lager. Bryony put in the order and added a large plate of ham and pickle sandwiches. She returned to the table to find Hannah back in the window seat with her legs folded under her, frowning at her empty glass. Not there. She's probably just gone out. But you've made me anxious now. Over lunch, Bryony found she was on the receiving end of the interrogation, and Hannah didn't beat about the bush with the questions. She took out a cigarette and lit it with her piercing green eyes trained on Bryony's face. How old are you, then? Classified information, is it? Let me guess. 31 and a bit. Bryony took a deadpan sip, and Hannah grinned. Oh, I scored a bullseye, didn't I? She dragged on the cigarette, eyes narrowing. There wouldn't be many women in your line of business, would there? Not many. So you work with blokes all the time? Pretty much. Explains why you dress like that. Bryony put her glass down and her elbows on the table. Like what? Like a broomstick that's been stored with the dishcloths, all grey and brown. Do you mind? This is my best trouser suit. The colour's called nutmeg, if I remember rightly. Trouser suits are so 60s, and I bet you're hiding nice legs in it. What you should wear is a little leather skirt and a bomber jacket or something like that, and get a haircut. The glasses aren't too bad on you, because you've got good bone structure, but the hair's daggy. Most women would give anything to be tall and skinny like you. Why don't you exploit it? Get a bit spunky. You could get away with just about anything. Not quite the idea if you work for the police. So how'd you get into it? I did my A-levels, then went to the Hendon Police College, very enlightened place. They were encouraging female students to go into CID, so I never did much time in uniform. I suppose you cop a bit of resentment for that. Bryony shrugged. From some quarters, occasionally. Interesting. I once had a role as a policewoman in a TV series, but I couldn't find anyone to help me with the character research. Now I know where to look. Cheers! Hannah drained her third glass, stubbed out her cigarette, and stood up. Think I'll give Claire another call. She was back almost immediately, lighting up again. I got her flatmate, Sarah. She says Claire's not back yet. She was supposed to be back yesterday. Thing is, I remembered something. She's got an important date this week. The people from some magazine are supposed to be coming up to interview her and do a shoot. I mean, you'd be crackers to miss an opportunity like that, wouldn't you? I'm sure it's this week, but I don't know exactly which day. I was trying to remember what she said about it. Maybe it's tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday, isn't it? I've got a feeling it's supposed to be on Wednesday. Give me Claire's address. I'll go round there when we've finished talking and see if I can find out anything more. I'm coming with you. This was against protocol, and Bryony was about to say so, but she'd already gone out on a limb and had a hunch that Hannah might prove useful. Come for a walk first, she said as they left. It'll clear your head after all that lager. Want to see if I can still walk in a straight line, do you? Hold this. She gave Bryony the half-smoked cigarette and ran onto the lawn, where she did 3 cartwheels in succession, in a perfectly straight line. Bryony gave her back the cigarette. Okay, you passed the test. Now tell me, what was this expedition about? I can see why Claire and her gentleman friend might want to go hiking together over a weekend and camp under the stars. But what gets Sylvie into it? She's the whole reason for it. She was in trouble. There was a pause, and Bryony refrained from prompting. For some reason, she sensed, this story was not an easy one to get out. Hannah stubbed a toe at the ground and looked sideways at Bryony. She was spooked. Paranoid might be one way of putting it. Thought she was being watched, even when she was in her bedroom. Or perhaps more accurately, especially when she was in her bedroom. First, she was having nightmares. Then she made up her mind that the creeps were for real, so she went looking for help. Claire thought it would be good to get her out of that house for a while. But that's not the whole story, is it? Why should Claire be the one to help her? You're going to worm this out of me, aren't you? Look, I'm not the right person to try and explain it to you. You really have to talk to Claire directly. But if Claire's not there, I'm going to have to get it out of you. In any case, your perspective's likely to be valuable. Hannah did 3 quick jumps on the spot in mock frustration, then set off walking. All right, but you'll have to let me tell it my way, which is going the long way round. If you don't like it, tough. Fine by me. OK, here goes. The first time I met Claire was in May, when we started rehearsals for the show. I mean, she's never seen me before, and she comes up to me while I'm putting my practice shoes on, and she looks at me in this funny way, just looks at me. Then she sits next to me on the bench, and she says, "What's the matter with your shoulder?" I sprained my shoulder in a show last Christmas, and I've been having physio for it ever since, but you couldn't tell that from just looking at me, and she couldn't have picked it up from any restriction in my movements because we hadn't started the dance work yet. So I said to her, "How'd you know there's anything the matter with it?" She didn't answer, but she put her hand on it, and it was like this charge of electricity running through me. So a few days later, when we were in the canteen, I asked her again, how did she know about my shoulder? And she said, "When I first saw you, you had light running through your body and I knew you were a dancer. But there was a blurred patch around your shoulder where the light couldn't run." Claire's whatever you want to call it, an intuitive, a psychic. She doesn't broadcast the fact. She told me she once belonged to a student society called Second Sight, but she pulled out because they were all obsessed with prophecy. She says that's not what it's about. Hannah screwed her face into a comic contortion. Look, I'm pretty much of a skeptic, you know. Haven't got a lot of time for people who crap on about vibrations and the age of Aquarius and all that. But Claire's not like that, not even slightly. And she can't do gimmicks. If you've lost your keys, she won't try and tell you where to find them. But we've got this guy Matthew in the company. He's Jesus' understudy. He comes in one Tuesday morning, because we get Mondays off, and she says, "Oh, I saw you yesterday with your little dog." "What little dog?" "He hasn't got a little dog." "A little Scotty with a red and green coat on it, called Casper." "Called what?" says Matthew. He's gone about the colour of that sheep over there. Turns out Matt had a little Scotty dog called Casper when he was a kid. Like I say, she doesn't broadcast the fact that she's psychic, but word gets around, you know. A story like that tends to spread. So people come looking for her sometimes because they want to know something or they want help. That's what happened with Sylvie. They were walking down a path under a line of massive arching poplars, with leaves spraying out in the stiff breeze. Bryony left some thinking space before continuing the questions. So Sylvie needed help, and she latched on to Claire. Pretty much. But there was something else. Sylvie had this talisman thing, a stone with an eye carved on it. Do you know where she got it from? She found it, up near the Ridgeway somewhere. Then she showed it to an old woman in one of those fortune-telling tents at the fair, and she threw a wobbly, apparently, told Sylvie to get that thing away from her. Claire thought she should get rid of it too, but not just anywhere. They'd come to a gate leading into a churchyard strewn with graves so old they were half swallowed up by the mossy earth. "Come in here," said Hannah. "I'll show you something." She led the way to a dark recess at the back of the churchyard, overhung by heavy branches, where there was a cleared space with a stone border and steps leading down to a well that looked as if it went deep underground. "Fried's well," said Hannah. "Some people think it's magic, supposed to cure things. So Claire said that Sylvie should bring her stone here and put it in the well. That was last weekend. But there was a priest walking around, and he came up to us and insisted on hanging about, giving us a great long lecture about the history of the well and the Lady Fried's, as he called her, patron saint of Oxford. There's a lot of warnings about dropping things in there, so we couldn't do anything while he was watching. But he just wouldn't go, so in the end we had to." Bryony saw the point about dropping things in. Silhouettes of bottles and glimpses of coloured plastic were visible under the surface of the water. But you could have come back. Claire had a better idea, or actually it was Jed. Jed who? Dunno his other name. He's someone Claire met through Second Sight. He's got some special interest in ancient places. He was fascinated by the fact that Sylvie found the stone on the ridgeway, or near there at any rate. Sylvie kept saying she didn't remember picking it up, but she knew that she was up near the White Horse Hill that day, and he said, "Then let's put it back where it came from." So the plan was to go to one of the long barrows along the ridgeway and leave the stone there, buried in the ground. He said we should do it at the equinox. I was a bit surprised Claire went along with the idea, but she was in a pretty funny state herself all last week. Hannah's eyes scanned the scene around them. Bryony waited for her to continue, but she looked increasingly agitated. They were meeting a friend of Jed's down there, Adrian his name is, because he's got a combi van that's good for touring. Claire was trying to make it a sort of group thing, you know, and she wanted me to go. She said I'd be a stabilising influence, but I just didn't want to be in it for some reason. But I was already in it. I mean, I'm in it now, aren't I? You don't think something's happened to Claire? They had reached the car, and Hannah leant with her elbows on the roof looking at Bryony. Better find her anyway. Bryony returned the scrutiny. Don't worry, I'll find her, whatever it takes. Chapter 11. Claire's domestic arrangements were very different from Hannah's. She shared a tiny brick house in St. Clement's with 2 other people, one of whom, Sarah, opened the door. She was elegant, with bobbed hair and high-heeled shoes, and looked immediately worried when Bryony showed her ID card and asked about Claire.
I'm afraid I don't know how to get in touch with her. She's gone camping, I think, but I thought she was supposed to be home last night. Can I ask what's wrong?
I'm investigating a murder. A friend of Claire's.
Close friend?
Do you mind if we come in? Bryony asked gently.
Sorry, of course, yes, do come in.
Sarah showed them into a tiny, neatly arranged sitting room.
Claire's supposed to be having some magazine photographer round tomorrow, so I've been tidying up. Would you like some tea?
That would be wonderful, said Bryony, with a bit too much enthusiasm. Civilization wasn't such a bad thing, she thought, as she slumped into an armchair and suddenly realised how tired she was. Hannah perched on the windowsill, looking ill at ease. Can't we just go and check out Claire's room? She asked. I know what stuff she had with her. I'd be able to tell right away if she's come back.
Cool it, Hannah, Bryony whispered. This is the kind of place where you wait to be shown around. You can leave the checking out to me.
She leant her head back.
For example, which theatre were these curtains nicked from?
Hannah put her hands on her hips. What a suggestion!
Funny, they match the ones in your room. They've been cut down to size and retaped at the top there. Your work, I shouldn't wonder. Claire doesn't sound like the kind of person who's handy with a pair of scissors.
Sarah came back with the tea on a tray and spoke while she was pouring.
So, this friend of Claire's who's been killed, she's not a close friend?
Hannah jumped in before Bryony could answer. Not exactly, but I am. Could I have a look in her room? Sarah looked anxiously at Bryony.
Would that really help your inquiries?
It would be helpful to know definitely whether Claire has returned to her room since last night.
But I can tell you that for certain. She hasn't.
How can you be certain? Asked Bryony.
Oh, several things. Her mail is still out on the table in the hall. Her toothbrush isn't in the bathroom. But in any case, I always know when she's home. She gets phone calls all the time, and I've had to answer them for her.
As if to corroborate this statement, the phone rang right on cue.
Excuse me,
said Sarah, and went out into the hall.
Excuse me,
Hannah mouthed with pursed lips and tiptoed across the floor in her sneakers. She opened the other door in the room, which led to some stairs.
I'm bursting for a piss. Back in a minute.
Hannah's gone up to the bathroom, Bryony said when Sarah returned. There's something I'd like to ask you. Did Claire ever talk about someone called Sylvie?
She did mention someone. She asked my advice, actually. Sylvie was having obsessive nightmares, but I couldn't really venture an opinion. Dreams aren't usually on the conversation menu around here, Inspector. There's something Claire and I have very different views about. I'm a psychology graduate, of the rats and stats variety. So is Neil, the third member of the household. Claire lives in a different mental world from us, and I'm sure she finds us very dry. But the three of us have been living here since our second year at university, and it works well. Have you heard of an organisation called the Problem Clinic?
Oh, yes, Sarah laughed. They used to be a bit of a standing joke, because a lot of psychologists in Oxford thought they were the problem. They're not properly registered, or they weren't, and they attract some rather questionable practitioners, the kind of people who think a week of primal scream therapy is a cure for everything. Claire went to them for a few sessions during her finals year, but I persuaded her to drop them. Everyone gets desperate before their finals. Do you know who Claire saw there?
Oh, let me think. Someone called Donald, Donlevy, Donovan, something like that?
Donnelly?
Yes, that sounds right. Is this relevant to your inquiries?
It could be. Now, if possible, I'd like to take a quick look in Claire's room. Hannah appeared from the bathroom as they reached the top of the stairs. Bryony noticed that her hands were crossed over her stomach, and she stepped aside a bit too smartly as Bryony and Sarah went into Claire's bedroom. Bryony's first impression was that this was serving as some sort of extension to the costume store at the theatre. There were clothes everywhere, and of every kind. Velvet hats, long silk skirts, striped tights, piles of folded jeans, belts and shoes by the dozen. Feather boas and printed scarves were draped over the mirror on the dressing table, where there were enough bottles to stock a department store counter. The bed was neatly made, but strewn with books, most of which were lying open. This was a room that belonged to a woman with confidence and style. Bryony was struck by the contrast with the sad little bedroom occupied by Sylvie. Sarah was looking troubled as she showed them out.
I hope you don't have reason to be concerned about Claire herself. Do you? It's not that she's gone missing or something, is it?
I'm afraid that's a possibility I can't exclude at this stage, said Bryony. Please let me know immediately if you hear from her. As soon as the front door closed behind them, she turned on Hannah.
OK, let me give you some advice. Don't think of taking up burglary as a career. It's not one of your skills. Come on, what have you got up that jumper?
I hoped I might find this in Claire's room, said Hannah, producing a thick, leather-bound notebook. I've seen her carrying it round. It's her diary.
So what's the hassle?
Demanded Hannah, wrenching the gear lever as she turned out of the high, then hitting the brakes just in time to prevent them rear-ending the car ahead in the rush-hour crawl around Longwall Street. Bryony, tight-lipped, hung on to the strap on her left and braced her feet against a set of imaginary brakes. You nicked something, and I'm a copper. So either I take it back and apologise, and we both get stewed with embarrassment, or you've made me an accessory to a theft.
Tough. Do you want to read it or not? Take a look, why don't you?
The diary was written in a variety of pens and pencils, some entries scribbled illegibly, and others in stylish, even writing. It looked as if it was the work of a dozen people. Well, Claire was an actress. But there was also a certain kind of order in her account. She'd recorded her rehearsal and performance times, hair appointments, and a range of social activities. The car lurched into motion again, causing the book to fall sideways, and she lost her place. "Did Claire wear glasses?" she said.
"No, why?"
"She was seeing an optician."
"Big deal."
3 times in 1 week. Getting glasses takes 2 appointments. There must have been some kind of problem.
"Can't she find anything more interesting?"
"Not while you're jolting us out of our seats every 5 yards. I'll have to sit down with this and concentrate, but first I want it registered as an exhibit."
"Which means what?"
"You hand it in at our incident room, just around to the left up here in Canterbury Road, and state where you got it from." Hannah made another lurch forward, then yanked at the handbrake and turned in her seat to face Bryony. "No problem. I'll think of something." When they arrived, Bryony found Elsingham seated at a table, looking rather as if he had nothing to do. He leapt to his feet as they came in. "This is Hannah Jensen," said Bryony. "She knows about Sylvie's movements on Friday and her plans for the weekend. Take a statement from her. And she has something that may contain important evidence, a diary, and this photograph." She handed him the picture of Claire, Jed, and Sylvie. "Have some copies made express. Hannah's got the negatives. I'm going to make a few calls." She went into her office, shut the door, and watched through the window as Hannah placed the diary on the table and Elsingham wrote the description in the ledger. Then she steeled her nerves and dialed Foster's number. He sounded suspiciously cheery.
"You all right? Keeping that nice sharp chin in the air, are you?"
"I need some advice, sir."
"Fire away."
"I have good reason to believe that some people have gone missing. Friends of Sylvie's."
"And what's the good reason?"
She made a better job of explaining this time, with assurances of a statement from a key witness. "The witness has concerns about the safety of a friend of hers, Claire Belmont, who was in contact with Sylvie in the days before the murder. Belmont was due to return from Avebury yesterday."
"Not our turf. Avery's down in Wiltshire, Williams."
"Yes, sir. That's where they were supposed to finish up. And the White Horse Hill, which is where they were starting from, is near Uffington, within the new Oxfordshire boundary. I just checked. I need advice about who to contact to start a search."
"Well, based on what you've told me, there wouldn't be grounds for a search. She might have just decided to prolong the trip. And if somebody skittled young Sylvie up here on Friday night, he can't be in two places at once, can he? He can't have been one of the party this other girl was going off with. Doesn't add up."
Frustration got the better of Bryony, and she was too tired to hold it back. "Not in simple arithmetic, sir, no. I suppose it doesn't. There's a lot of complex detail in this case, too complex to explain right now over the phone. It's 5 o'clock. I want to get a search underway without another night's delay."
"Now, don't get stroppy. Best you can do at this stage is phone the station at Marlborough. There are regular patrols of the Ridgeway because there's been some trouble with the bike gangs tearing up the turf along there. You can put in a description of this woman for the patrol so they can keep an eye out."
Bryony hung up and sat staring at the empty desk in front of her for a moment before going to the door. "Hannah, do you know what kind of car they were in?" "Yeah, a green Porsche convertible, very flash. Looked new to me. 2-seater, which is why I was originally going to take Sylvie. But Jed said there was room behind the seats for a small adult. Adrian's supposed to have a white combi van." "Don't suppose you know the number plate of Jed's car?" "Nah." The desk sergeant at Marlborough took her call and was polite enough. He seemed careful about noting all the details she'd given him, but said, "Bit of a slim chance, I'm afraid, Inspector. There's a lot of hikers around now. We have the hippies and the druids and the dropouts. Not that you can always tell the difference. They come up here for the equinox." "What about the car?"
"We can keep a lookout for the Porsche, but a white combi's a needle in a haystack. They're all over the place this time of year. Still, we'll do our best. I'll contact the patrol and give them the description. Let us know if you get any more information." As she put the phone down this time, Bryony was relieved to see Hannah leaving, with a cursory wave in her direction. Elsingham put his head in. "Took the hind leg off a donkey, that one. Donnelly's been on the blower again, Inspector. He's got himself steamed up about something, and I told him you'd be back about now. Do you want me to stick around in case he turns up?"
Bryony pressed her hands against her forehead, swiftly trying to sort priorities in her mind. Has he got his precious book back yet?
"No, that's the thing. He told me to keep it here. I've been having another look at it, and I'd say he was definitely a suitable case for treatment. That wasn't a bad movie, by the way. Did you see it?"
"No, I didn't. Can we just keep our minds on the job, please?"
"Well, I think you should read a couple of bits of this here."
He handed her the open book, pointing to a passage at the top of the right-hand page, an entry for Thursday, 19th July. 3:45 S.H. Beck. "Cold influences. It's all stirring up. Can't seem to help because she's got no ballast. This is not her stuff at all, but she's imprinting, especially overnight. Remember, paranoia is contagious. So is she giving it to me, or am I giving it to her? Can't hack it if this is the way it's going to go. Organise for Gail to talk to her. She can ask nice conventional questions. Gail won't get paranoid. Bryony also scanned the entry underneath to see how his writing about other patients compared. 4:30 M. Gottlieb. New demarcations are working. Alertness near optimum. Keep the orientation outwards. Still confusing the signals, but can steer through most of it. Ready to close with us soon. Say 3 more sessions. She looked up at Elsingham. Gobbledygook. You can see he's more worried about Sylvie than this other person, but there's nothing specific that can help us. Have a look at this, then. He sat at the desk opposite her and turned over a few pages. This is a couple of weeks later. 3:45 S.H. Beck. Gail has duck shoved. This one doesn't fit her paradigm. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, into the zone where no paradigm holds. I'm not a falconer anyway. Can't call her back. Was hard enough getting back myself. Won't go there again, not for anyone. Chaos is come again if I'm stuck with this. Try another way. Give her a channel for all that cold pressure. What does he mean by try another way? Elsingham watched as Bryony worked through the lines. Ask him. Get him to come in here and take a proper statement from him, typed. I don't want any more of that loopy handwriting to plough through, and make sure you keep him focused. Tell him what we need is details. Who, how, why, what, when, where. Not a lot of stuff about pressure and temperature. Get Westcott to sit in with you. I have to check on some things with Canning. Chapter 12. Elsingham appeared with Kevin Donnelly's statement in his hand, just as Bryony was getting round to a proper reading of Claire's diary. I think you should look at it now, he said. I will do, soon as I've finished with this. Am I wanted for anything else? No. Go home, Elsingham. See if your wife still recognises you. She's all right. She stayed in London for a week. I expect she's spent my next 3 months' wages on Oxford Street by now. Go home anyway. It's an important ritual. Bryony secured the front door of the building with its 2 inside bolts, and, with the place to herself, returned to reading the diary. Like most people's diaries, it was kept unevenly, with phases when extensive entries were made every day, and others when it contained little more than notes of appointments. The fuller entries were mostly about Claire's stage appearances, but it was immediately evident that the pages following her meeting with Sylvie were among the most detailed. Wednesday, 10th September 1974. St. Giles's Fair. Last night, when we left the theatre, Ferris wheel still going, merry-go-rounds flashing and churning out 3-note tunes, long queues at the candy floss stalls, 11 o'clock this morning, a few pieces of heavy machinery waiting to be loaded onto trucks, and an empty pavement covered in wisps of straw. The crowds have moved up into the corn market. Had to push my way through to get to Boots, then got in a daze, wandering round trying lipsticks and weigh-out nail polish. Hannah got told off last night for wearing black nail polish on stage. Snot black, she says. It's ebony gold, £2 a bottle. I was trying out something in one of those freestanding mirrors on the cosmetics counter. Suddenly felt kind of self-conscious. I mean, suddenly. Good reason, maybe. What's somebody with an Oxford degree, 24 next birthday, doing messing about with cosmetics like some pea-brained teenager? But it wasn't that. More like someone was actually watching me. Left and joined the crush in the street heading for Marks and Spencer's. Then changed my mind and cut through into the market. Walked fast past the butcher's shops. Can't stand the sight of all the headless deer hanging by their feet with their blood dripping on the floor. Makes me think, yes, I really will become a vegetarian. How do you know when you're being followed? I mean, in the middle of the morning, in the centre of town, with people all around. I knew. Not a good feeling. Voices in the head saying different things. You're paranoid. Get a grip of yourself. Go home, right now, and lock the door. Couldn't see anyone remotely suspicious. Mostly just women with shopping bags, minding their own business. Went back to looking at things on the stalls, but felt like I was in a film or something. Acting naturally, when really there's something else going on. Voice in my head again. Go to George's Cafe. If anyone follows you, you'll know. Sit by the windows. If anyone's hanging around, you'll see. So off I go, and sure enough someone does come in after me. A girl who I'm sure I saw in boots a few minutes ago. About 16, several inches shorter than me, little pixie face, shoulder-length blonde hair, and a cute French accent when she asks for her coffee. She follows me to the table by the window. You were in the show last night. Can I talk to you? Okay, I'm used to guys who do this, but why do I get the creeps about being tailed by a teeny bopper? She witters on about how she learned singing in high school and how she loves the day-by-day song. You are religious? She asks. Funny how often people make that assumption. If you're in Godspell, you must be a camp follower of Jesus the hippie. Am I a spiritual person? Wouldn't exactly use that word, I said. Do I believe in spirits? Now it is getting a bit too close to the bone. Wouldn't use that word spirits either, I said. People mean all kinds of different things by it. Then she makes this odd, fluttering gesture with her hands. I'm sorry, I don't know what is the right word to use. I thought you might be someone I could talk to. I pick up my bag to signal I'm heading off, but she catches my eye. I wonder if you would be able to help me. Bag drops back on the floor and I realize no choice now. People in trouble can pick me out. Sixth sense. Takes one to know one. I should have known straight away that's what was bothering me as I was walking around. Transference. It's not me who's being followed. It's her. Sixth sense. A lot of people use that expression, but Claire seemed to be using it in a more particular way. As she stopped reading, Bryony felt her aloneness in the building and resisted an impulse to take another look around. She massaged her scalp a bit before turning the next page. Friday, 12th September. Sylvie Hélène Beck. That's her name. Nice. You could be a film star with that name. But she's an au pair girl. A whole unhappy story. Okay, there's something around her, but it's probably just her bad situation making all the negative energy. Well, that's what I think at first. She has dreams, she tells me. She's asleep in her bed, and she's dreaming that she's asleep in her bed. And there's a presence in the room. She wakes up, and it's daylight, so she gets out of bed and walks through the house. Nobody home. But she's not alone. She opens the doors, the windows. She wants to go outside, get away from the place altogether, but for some reason she can't step through the doorway. Then she really wakes up, and it's dark. She's sitting up in bed. She knows there's someone there. This doesn't sound good. Dreaming that you've woken up. It's always the beginning of something coming through. Of course, I say a few things to reassure her, but she obviously hasn't finished what she wants to tell me. From about a week ago, the dream's been changing. She's walking through the house like before, and there's this feeling of something building up around her. A force, she calls it. If it gets strong enough, it'll turn into something or someone. She has to open up the house to stop the force building up, but then she realizes it's already too late. She can hear breathing quite close to her, but she's too afraid to look around. More than that, she's paralyzed. Then there's a noise, a horrible, deafening noise that crashes right inside her skull. And she's looking downwards from high up, as if she's floated to the ceiling, and she sees this girl lying face down on the ground, blood everywhere. The girl is her. This kid is in serious trouble. Tried to lighten things up, told her to find some nice bedtime reading, gave her a stack of Vogue magazines and a couple of Motown LPs. She doesn't have enough of a life. If I can get her out of the mess she's in, I'll have to try and fix her up with a boyfriend. There'll be a pack of new first-year men around in a couple of weeks' time. Won't solve her problem, but it'll give her more of a fighting chance. Right now she's like an open invitation to the mischief-makers. Demons. They pick on people like that. Innocents, all on their own in their heads, sweating fear. It's like, come and get me. But why her in particular? Has she talked to anyone else about all this? Her counsellor, she says, then clams up completely. So of course I have to find out what she's trying not to tell me. A few more pointed questions, and she goes red in the face. Hands start fluttering in the air like mad little birds. I'm not supposed to tell you. You mustn't say anything to him. He's only trying to help. Mr. Donnelly told me to find you. Oh, yes. So this is all down to dear old crazy Kevin. And yes, he's been hypnotizing her, stirring it up. So she scares him with the nightmare, and he sets her on to me. She's to go and see Godspell, find me afterwards, say she's a fan, and lure me into the picture with her pathetic story and her charming French accent. Well, I fell for it, didn't I? Made a little speech about Kevin Donnelly's responsibilities to maintain my right to privacy and not refer his patients to me via the stage door or any other bloody back door. Anyway, I tell her, stay away from hypnotists. Same goes for tarot readers, astrologers, fortune-tellers and spirit mediums. But I already talked to a fortune-teller in a tent at St. Giles' Fair. Then she brings something out of her bag. I needed to tell someone about this, she says, and buries it in my hand. A stone. Something happens when I open my hand to look at it. I can't see it. There's a hole right in the centre of my field of vision. When I look up again, everything's turned into a swimming mess. Saturday, 13th September. Last night, what happens? I dream that I've woken up. I'm in a sort of attic room with a low window, and the door is wide open. I get out of bed and go down the stairs. There's a middle floor of the house with bedrooms where people are asleep. I go on down the stairs to the ground floor. All the doors are open. There's a pink sitting room where a woman's reading a magazine. Then opposite, on the other side of the hall, the same woman watching a little girl play the piano. After that comes a dark room filled with old things, but they're swirling round in chaos. I have to get away from there. At the back is a kitchen where two little boys are scribbling in school books. Place is full of some bad energy. It wants to suck me in. No, I'm leaving. I walk right out through the back door, and then I'm awake, in my own bed, in the dark. Thanks for the warning, I think. It's not my drama. I can walk out of there, but if I don't, the script is right there, ready for me, and I've already taken the first step into it. This morning, decided to ask Sarah about it. Knew exactly what she was going to say. Auto-suggestion. You unconsciously remembered what the girl told you about the house she lives in, and then replayed it to yourself. I wanted her to say that, because I wanted to believe it. Godspell closes tonight. We've had queues for returns all week. Matinee today is full to bursting. I've got first-night nerves all over again. Sunday, 14th September. Standing ovation and 2 encores. Oh boy. Stage adrenaline is the greatest drug. Collective euphoria. White magic. Love Godspell. Some of my friends think it's naive, but so what? It has something. While I'm still on a high, there's something I have to do. Little ritual. Had this idea. Sylvie has to cast the stone into St. Friedeswide's well. Asked Hannah to come. Why? Because she hasn't got a psychic bone in her body. Somebody has to be there to ground us. Monday, 15th September. The Lady Friedeswide let us down. She didn't want our bad karma. Some boffin of a priest came hovering round us, and we had to give up on the mission. Ultimatum time. Told Sylvie I can't help her. I'm the wrong person, got troubles of my own, And I do. Worried about my eyes now. Got the blur effect again this morning when I looked in the mirror. Couldn't see my own face properly. Went straight to the optician's, and he's booked me for another test with a specialist who comes in on Wednesdays. Tuesday, 16th September. So who rings me up last night out of the blue? Jed. Just at this point, someone from the old Second Sight group decides to make contact. Coincidence or what? Said I'd meet him for lunch at the Eagle and Child. He seemed very keen. Bit too keen? I see him from the street, sitting in the lounge bar window, long hands around a pint glass, long lean face, curly dark hair. You could cast him in Jane Eyre, Mr. Rochester. Soon as I come in, he jumps to his feet and shakes hands, special little press on my palm, then whisks off to the bar to get me a drink. Oxford blokes like the game of being gentlemen. But Jed's not the public school type. First time I met him, I thought, he's got a real person's voice, not one of those braying Oxford voices that are all mouth, but a voice warmed in the throat and the chest. Sexy voice or not, though. I'm not up for being seduced. So I'm trying to play it a bit cool, but he picks up straight away that I'm on edge and starts asking personal questions. Bit by bit he gets the story out of me. The girl who came looking for me, the dreams, the eye trouble. I tell him the optician thinks it could be cataracts. You haven't got cataracts, he says. That's a premonition. Stop trying to run away from it. I left Second Sight because it was full of people who want to own the future by messing about with tarot cards and Ouija boards, control freaks. To me, Second Sight, sixth sense, whatever you want to call it, is just another way of seeing. Some people see only forms, and most of the time that's what I see too, but sometimes I see energies. Why not? Energies are real. This trouble around Sylvie, should I have handled it differently? Should I be telling her to get out of that house and go home to her parents? But then that won't help if she's carrying it around with her, if she disturbed something when she found that stone. I'm thinking aloud and probably saying too much, so I clam up and Jed starts probing about the stone. Where did Sylvie find it? Soon as I get home, I ring her up to ask her. I don't remember, she says. Come off it, Sylvie. It's not the kind of thing you find every day. Eventually I get a kind of half-story out of her, all about chasing the boys into some woods near the Uffington White Horse. Something's definitely missing at the end of the story. I take her back through it from the beginning, step by step. You found the stone in the woods, is that right? Yes, she says. And then what happened? But oh no, whatever it was, she's not talking. I don't remember anything about being in those woods. Wednesday, 17th September. More dreams. I'm walking out in the country somewhere, and I have this feeling I'm being followed. I'm afraid to look back. Next thing, I'm in the middle of the wood, with leaves falling all around me, pooling round my feet when I step forward. I notice that the ground's littered with broken stones, big things with fierce, jagged edges, and they're lying on top of the leaves. How come? They should have been covered by the fall, because there are leaves fluttering down all the time. When I bend to pick up one of the stones, something else catches my eye, something that's covered with leaves, but not completely. At first it looks as if someone thrown away an old pair of jeans, but what I touch when I stretch out my hand is solid. I start burrowing through the leaves, flinging them in all directions. It's a man lying on his front. The leaves are all matted together now, in a sticky mass. They make my hands sticky as I pull at them. And then I find I'm holding a broken piece of something that isn't a stone, and the sticky stuff has turned dark red, and it's running all over my hands. If this is a premonition, what the hell do I do? Thursday, 18th September. Jed's taken over. Should I have let him? I don't know about this expedition he's planned, but maybe it's all right if there's enough of us. If Hannah comes, and this guy Adrian who's supposed to meet up with us. I can't think straight about this any more. I feel really on edge, as if I'm being watched all the time. When Bryony came to the end, she somehow didn't want to look up. The room on the other side of the glass panel was in darkness, but with the reading lamp on, she was visible. She switched it off and listened. Was it only her own breathing she could hear? As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she thought she could make out the outline of a human form opposite her. In the first split of the second she froze and missed a heartbeat, but then an overriding instinct told her to duck, and in that other fragment of the second something crashed through the glass partition to hit the wall so violently that it sprayed chunks of plaster over the surface of the desk. Chapter 13. Wednesday, 24th September, 1974. The Socko team had worked all night, and, at Pavan's insistence, cordoned off the entire incident room. Every splinter of glass was being collected and reassembled in a giant jigsaw on one of the trestle tables that had been brought in for displaying evidence. On a second table, tied up and tagged, was the rock that had done the damage. Bryony, after another sleepless night, had arrived back at 7:30 and stood in the doorway watching as Pavan unwrapped the rock and began scraping its surface with a fine scalpel. "Something like that was used to kill Sylvie, wasn't it?" she said. "Quite possibly." He stopped for a moment and looked at her. "Don't be so downcast. This may at least provide us with some new leads." "Nothing less than a definitive connection is going to convince Foster. And this little episode has only made things worse. There was an unlocked door on the second floor of the building leading off the fire escape. No one thought to check it. Foster's already drawn the conclusion that we're dealing with an act of common or garden vandalism by louts who got into the building as a result of our carelessness." Pavan smiled. "Hardly. This rock hit the glass at almost a pure right angle. It was hurled with extraordinary speed and directness. If you had not got out of the way in time, we might have had a second murder on our hands." "That's reassuring." He stopped and faced her. "Don't joke about it, Bryony. If whoever did this was intending to kill you, you would have had no chance." "So if that wasn't the intention, it was a warning. Someone's very keen that we don't find out any more." "You need a larger team on this inquiry, and so do I. Why don't you talk to Macready?" he said. "But it's totally against protocol. You know that. I thought protocol was your middle name." Bryony conducted a mental argument with herself. If she went behind Foster's back and called Macready, the chief superintendent at HQ, she'd be a pariah in the local force. Elsingham arrived just after 8, looking bleary-eyed, and with the hair on one side of his head lying at an odd angle.
"Good night's sleep," he said, shaking his head. "Worst thing you can do to yourself when you're under pressure. Here's the photos you asked for. I collected them on the way in.
Jeepers creepers, what happened to you?" "Target practice. Let Pavan worry about it for now. We have to follow through on yesterday's leads."
"Have you read that statement of Donnelly's yet?"
"I was interrupted before I got round to it." It was still on her desk, she realized, covered in plaster dust. Bryony fished out the 2 typed sheets and shook off the dust, ignoring the disapproving looks of a young Socko who was just emerging from a crawl under the desk, then encountering more disapproval from Pavan as she passed him on her way to the kitchen. "Sorry," she said, "some things can't wait. I've heard of people being able to read tea leaves, but if you can read anything into the patterns of dust on this, you'll be putting the gypsies out of business." She went into the kitchen and switched on the kettle, but was unaware of its rising noise as she started to take in Donnelly's story.
"Sylvie Hélène Beck first saw me on Thursday, 27th May. She was suffering from the kinds of anxiety symptoms I see in a lot of patients: insomnia, obsessive thoughts, irrational fears. The symptoms got worse, and for a number of reasons I felt I couldn't handle the case any longer. A colleague, Gail Meredith, agreed to see Sylvie with a view to taking her over, but Gail's view was that the problems were clinical and should be referred on for psychiatric treatment. This left me with a dilemma:
Should I send this young patient on to someone who might put her on strong drugs or even electric shock treatment? I decided to make use of some of the experimental training I'd done and try